I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Hey, Tony, before we get started, I happen to have my phone. There is a family that emailed in that they're having trouble finding the calling data. Meredith, can I forward this to you so that you can get them the login information so they can join the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
All right. Well, let's get to the first item on the agenda, which is the approval of minutes. Comments on the minutes? If there are no comments or changes, can I have a motion?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the minutes from executive sessions on June 15th, June 24th, June 25th, and July 23rd.
Second?
Second, Taffy.
All in favor?
Aye, Ruby.
Aye, Hillary.
Hi, Victor.
Hi, Gina.
Hi, Melissa.
Aye, Taffy.
Aye, Tony. All opposed? Okay, motion passes. Meredith, we go to public comment. You could close public comment and we could start reading.
All right. Okay, we have one public comment this evening from Kristana Esslinger, 59 Ledgewood Drive in Weston, and the topic is fall reopening. She says, first off, I would like to recognize that WPS will work within the guidelines of the state of Connecticut on fall reopening. I am interested in hearing Principal Wolek's comments later in the evening, as I know that they have already given this great thought. I know this is an incredibly complicated on so many levels. A few considerations related to the high school. It is a fact that teens have begun to socialize more. As I pondered that, I thought that in the 2.5 months, they could perhaps be exposed and recover well before school starts. Number two, youth sports is opening up end of June, furthering their exposure and perhaps recovery, even if no symptoms. Fall sports are expected to resume in some capacity as well. 70+% of WHS students are athletes. Please keep in mind that any of the distance learning or hybrid options will impact working parents who need to drive their athletes to practice after school hours, freshmen, sophomores, and some juniors and seniors. Could another option for the high school be that it opens as normal and classes are live streamed for those students and families who are not comfortable returning to school in the fall? I realize this option presents its own challenges as well. Just sharing another consideration, and I will include it in my survey as well. And that concludes public comment.
Shut down
Tony, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Tony.
Yep, that's what I thought. Public comment, especially as it relates to school reopening. I'm sure a lot of these comments and questions will be probably addressed during the course of the discussion, if not today, over the next couple of weeks, as we actually, consolidate and solidify our reopening plans. But thank you for the comments. Next agenda item. Bill, I'll hand it over to Bill to give an enrollment update.
Thank you, Tony. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, so we put this item first. The big item for today certainly is going to be the next item, the reopening update. But we thought you should have your enrollment date update ahead of that. Quite traditionally in the July meeting, we bring you the first of these. You as a board will now get these weekly going forward, typically until mid-September. If in mid-September, week to week, they're largely repetitive, we would hold them then till the October 1st, which is the required date by the state of Connecticut to list enrollment. It's posted on the website for anyone tying into the meeting to see, and it'll be posted there, and as you as a board can see it. At this point, as is happening in other districts around us, enrollment is up. We are up over last year at this point, by around 19 students, and we're over the projection by an even bigger number from Malone and McBroom. If you look at the diagonals, meaning the K class last year to first grade this year, 1 to second grade this year, you see some significant jumps in our enrollment. While it may be relatively flat at the cohort level, year to year, that same year, the cohort is growing. So you also know as a board, you voted to add a section in the third grade, which was quite necessary, as you can see here. We're also pressing up against it in some other grades. So this is good news for Weston. Our enrollment is up. Later, we'll talk about the governor's press conference. Brian Lucy was a representative superintendent. He mentioned New Canaan is up. They're adding teachers as we are, but this is good news for Weston. We will track this week by week, and we'll see how we do. One thing I should flag for you here is you have the multiple columns. In the next rendition of this, we'll actually put letters at the top of the columns to make them easier to talk about. But the third column in is the actual enrollment. The info snap, fourth column in, becomes very important because those are families that are in the process of fully registering, but it's not fully complete. We find that it's a pretty high ratio of those in that group info snap who then fully enroll, especially across the summer months. So that's why we combine that into the total at this point. So that's your enrollment update. And again, you'll get this weekly every Friday sent to you, so you have a sense of what we're doing and how we're doing.
Thanks, Bill. Any questions from the board?
It's Gina. Bill, if I'm looking at this correctly, it looks like in first grade, we're down to like only 4 or 5 students before we cross over our threshold, if I'm reading correctly. I'm just wondering, fully recognizing this is not a typical year, what sort of growth we have in a normal year? Like, is there concern about grade 1 tipping over our threshold?
Yeah, Laura can speak to this. She and I have been conferring on this. We are concerned about that. And again, to give perspective, other districts are seeing this, and those districts that can afford it they're holding their class size guidelines, because in whatever mode we're in this fall, class size guidelines are going to be critical. We don't want to let our class sizes get above and beyond. But Laura, why don't you speak to this, because you're tracking this closely and have a good historic record.
I am, yes. Bill and I have been staying in communication about this because we are seeing an uptick in our first grade enrollment. And as Gina pointed out, we are approaching the class size guidelines that on the upper end. We do typically have a lull in the summer in terms of enrollment. There is no lull this summer. We are getting weekly enrollments, weekly inquiries. Lori Eagle, our registrar, and I are in communication almost daily because she has so many emails and phone calls from families who are looking to move into Weston or are already here or are considering not continuing in private school and starting in our school. And a good number of them are first graders. So we are in communication with those families and we are tracking it very closely. I am concerned if what we're seeing right now continues, those classes will get quite large and will tip the class size guidelines. So we're watching them very closely.
I personally would be not concerned, but be extremely happy about that. I think this is good news. And
I didn't mean it wasn't good news. I'm just watching to make sure we don't go over guidelines.
No, absolutely. But
it's wonderful.
I think we have to watch this. I think we're going to have staffing needs as we actually solidify exactly the mode in which we're going to reopen. We should include this in the overall staffing needs, obviously. We really don't know what mode we're going to reopen in, but I think that, because we're going to have, depending on which mode, we're going to have additional needs anyway, and this should be watched and incorporated with the overall needs that we're going to have with respect to reopening as well.
Yeah, Tony, if I may underscore that, again, the districts that have the wherewithal, and it's a challenge financially for all of us, but the class size, no matter how we open, the class size is going to be critical. Because if we have students who've not been in school since March, that ratios that we enjoy so much here, particularly elementary, we want those if we're full in. If we're hybrid, it makes it all that much more important in distance learning. So that's where, again, I don't want to overquote New Canaan, but Brian just went statewide with the governor, and he was emphasizing that New Canaan is holding to their class sizes and hiring teachers. They're in that same good news moment we are, with families moving in, wanting to be in these systems, but part of that is the class size ratios and holding to it.
Yeah.
So if we weren't dealing with the challenges of COVID, at what point would we need to make a decision about this section about first grade from being able to hire top quality teaching staff and to allow Laura and her building gurus to do what they need to do about getting the kids sectioned off into their classroom? Where are we as far as like needing to make a decision on that particular grade?
Well, timing wise, it's now. I mean, I think that's part of the dilemma. We're 4 off and we've been so busy with our larger set of plans. We've not lost sight of this, but we've put this a bit on a back burner, even though we're paying, attention to it. That may sound like a contradiction, but it's not. I mean, we're headed to August 1. We've just landed a phenomenal new first grade teacher. I'm not going to say the name, but we just literally landed someone that's a great talent. But we also, earlier in the season, had 2 great teachers we landed who a week ago said they're withdrawing because of COVID. They need to stay closer to home. So I think it would be now that we at least are actively looking. And that doesn't mean you hire, but that we're actively looking. So I think coming out of this meeting tonight with the endorsement, a consensus, not a vote clearly, but I hear the board saying, let's be attentive to this, that I think, Laura, we should be posting and looking. That doesn't mean we hire, but if we don't post, we don't have a pool, and then you can't hire, if that makes sense.
Well, Bill, I think we need to, we're hopefully if we can make a decision or if we have more clarity on the mode in which we're going to reopen, we can then figure out exactly what the staffing needs and incorporate this in there and make a decision. I think until we decide exactly, or a decision is made for us on exactly how we're going to reopen, I think it's hard to make a one-off, a one-off decision.
Although, Tony, I will say Laura made answered a question this morning in the task force meeting that we have to plan to educate all the children, regardless of whatever mode we're in. And, when we're talking about 5- and 6-year-old students, I think, the pressures of, as teacher trying to juggle those students in any of the environments that we may be in, it's just a greater challenge. I mean, I'm just cognizant. I just know how difficult it is when we have to add sections uber late. It becomes a really big challenge, and I don't know.
Well, we haven't tipped a section yet, have we? In first grade? No. Okay.
Yeah, we're within.
No, we have not.
Yeah, I mean, we're within 4 students. I think what I will take out of this, and Laura and I can work on this, Ken, Laura, Jen, and I, is I think the smart thing would be to post for an elementary. Again, you don't have to hire, but at least you then begin to attract in candidates, and that gives us flexibility. And especially given what I'm hearing in other towns, we'll be competing. we'll be competing for good teachers. So again, that's something we can proceed on. It doesn't commit anybody to anything, but at least we know we can be generating a pool of potential teachers.
I'm wondering, Laura, if you can talk about the pre-K. Are you there? I see
Sure,
that
yes.
the numbers went down, but I thought that then there would be other kids that would want to step up to take those slots.
We do have some families that have inquired about enrolling. Some of the families I've spoken to are waiting to see what the opening will look like. There are some preschool families who feel that distance learning is not what they want for their preschooler, so they're kind of holding off and waiting to see which way the district heads.
And what are other preschools doing in the area?
Typically, the area preschools follow us in terms of planning. I know there's been a lot of discussions they've had over the summer, and I've been in touch with them, more at the beginning of the summer. But they typically follow our lead. But I do know there are area preschools that are planning for trying to social distance and what that will look like in their schools. But I have not heard of any definitive plans from the area preschools.
Are there other questions on this item?
If there's no more questions, maybe we can move to continue our discussion on the school reopening plans. Bill and I had in the chair meeting today, had a discussion about how to proceed, and I think that it's important not only that we continue in terms of the questions that the board had, but hit a few of the major topics that came out of the special board meeting that we had to go through the state submission. I think one of the things that I think we should actually spend some time with is looking at the full reopening plan and the hybrid plan, and going into some detail of the pros and cons for each. So I think while the hybrid plan has been one that has been, that we spend a lot of time with, I think the full reopening plan is one that we actually need to make sure that we're prepared for in the event that the state actually mandates the full school reopening. So I think that's one of the things that we should actually spend some time with. The other thing is because our decision will ultimately be based on public health guidelines and the health and safety of our students and staff, I think another area that we should probably spend some time with is the public health guidelines of how we're planning to actually develop all the protocols and the triggers that will actually inform us as to which mode of attendance we're actually going to be opening school with, but not only opening school with, but also the triggers for moving from one mode of attendance to the other. So maybe we'll start with Bill, maybe, and the administrators and the principals giving some more details on some of these items, and then opening up to additional questions from the board members.
Thanks, Tony. So what we'll do is I'll very briefly give an update on some of the state information, as well as the governor. He had a major press conference today at 4 o'clock. Many of us listened in. I'll give you some thoughts on that. Then I'm going to turn it over to Ken and Dan DeVito, and between them, they're going to update you on some really critical staffing issues, as well as what's called voluntary, we're calling it voluntary distance learning, the state voluntary remote learning. That's the required provision that all families have the option to do. If they don't feel comfortable coming into school in a full opening or a hybrid, we are obligated to provide them what's being called voluntary distance learning, or synonymous with voluntary remote learning. So Ken and Dan will speak to that a little bit, Dan DeVito. Then Ken will speak a little bit to some calendar issues. Yes, you're voting in the next item on those calendar items, but it's important to look at those in context. And then there's a communications piece that Dan DeVito will hit. Then Tracy will give you an update on some district-wide issues, all that relate to Tony's questions. The principals are prepared to do a Q&A with you to try, as you probe into the full versus remote. It's easier for them to kind of give you that in the Q&A. We talked this afternoon because since they talked with you last week, and also you now have the full document, they'll feel better having you guide them into some of those questions on particularly full-on versus remote. We are working intensively on all three, but especially the full-on remote. Once we get through all of that, I'll come back and do the public health indicators. But I want you to, want to get through all of that first. In terms of the state, I think as the board knows, but all of the community listening in, we are working under state requirements, working under state law. Early last week, we had a very strong directive, an appropriate one, but strong, from the commissioner to all the superintendents saying that the plans that were to be submitted Friday had to address all three scenarios: the full opening, the hybrid, and the distance learning, as well as, again, the voluntary distance learning. You could not just address one. Also reiterated that at this point, based on public health metrics statewide, they are insisting on a full back-in. Everybody submitted those plans. We learned Friday that the governor was conceivably going to give more flexibility. The governor's been hearing a lot from educators across the state, particularly teachers, as well as other administrators and educators, about the concern of meeting the mitigating factors, mitigating strategies, in particular the social distancing of 6 feet, and meeting that particularly in the high schools and many middle schools. Today at 4 o'clock, the governor had a press conference. Many of you may have listened in on it. I did. We did not have a specific statement from the governor, a specific statement from the commissioner, but in the Q&A with the press, it was said that, and we're trying to get the answer on this, it was said that the districts would be given the flexibility to make the decision they need to make, and that it had been a misunderstanding previously that we were not being given that flexibility. Be it what it may, I mean, we have in writing last week, the commissioner saying it is the law to send all three in, and it's the law to fully open. We're now learning today that it will be, we think, the option of each school board in each district to determine its approach to opening based on public health metrics, but maybe not do that right away. So we're trying to get clarity. It's a little unclear right now, but it is a little different point than it was Friday. Friday, it was adamant, full in for all. Today, it appears that in the next week or two, we would have, as a district, full flexibility to make the decision on what makes most sense for us within a public health context. Last comment there, if you listen to the press conference, talk about flexibility for high schools, most, possibly middle school, but great concern that elementary schools are full in. And that ties, as you know, the mitigating strategies. A key one is cohorting, which is recognized you can do at elementary schools, almost impossible to do at the high school. The social distancing, Thursday night, the CDC came out and said 6 feet. That's been encouraged in Connecticut, but the CDC, if they're to be followed, said 6 feet. Most high schools in the state, including our own, and including our own middle school, as well as WIS, cannot get to 6 feet if we're all in with social distancing. So these are all factors that are there. But the important thing, as the commissioner stressed today in the call, is keep working hard on a full in plan, keep working hard on the hybrid plan, keep working hard on the distance learning plan, because there may be necessary shifting amongst them. So that's where Weston is. We still are working hard on these three plans. What you received as a community and a board, and the state received Friday, is our foundation to build from in each of those three areas, plus the voluntary distance learning. I think I want to right now turn it, and it'll be helpful to get through this first part before you do any questions. Turn it to Ken, who's going to do an update, as I said earlier, on staffing, the voluntary distance learning, the calendar, and communications. And then we'll open it up for you to talk with all of us, but particularly the principals. So Ken?
Yes, good evening, everyone. So I just going to give you an update from a district perspective. I'll start with staffing. And, one of the things that we are working hard on and monitoring closely is in relation to a recent staff survey we gave to all certified and non-certified employees. And it was a listing of, several areas where staff members may have a concern, and 135 of our staff members indicated they have a personal concern related to either their health or childcare or other factors, and that's really that's a big number, right? I mean, approximately 60% of our staff, and we know that with any plan, whether in person or hybrid, even a small percentage of our staff, 7-10%, it'd be very difficult at all to facilitate in-person or hybrid learning if we have a significant portion of our workforce, that we would have to either find substitutes, which now our substitute pool, we are finding that our substitute pool is smaller, just given personal decisions that people are making. But what we are doing is we're going back with those 135 staff members with a much more targeted survey and asking for specific information from medical providers in accordance with ADA laws and so forth, working in conjunction with our legal counsel to work with each staff member that may have a personal concern and see if there are accommodations. But also, we need to gauge, what may be the impact on the district if we have, a portion of our workforce that is unable to be on site. And so we're working through that. So I imagine you're going to have questions about that. I certainly can come to that with more detail. But that's, in determining the reopening scenario, that's one of the biggest challenges. I mean, staffing is right up there with that and figuring that out. Dan is going to try.
Ken, you want to take questions on that now or later?
It's up to the board. Yeah, if you prefer.
Melissa, you're muted.
That's fine.
You're talking, Melissa, but you're muted. Okay.
No, I'm okay, thanks.
Yeah, Ken, Taffy, I just wait until Ken is done. If he's finished, maybe then we can entertain questions on that.
Yeah, let me two more district updates. One is related to voluntary distance learning. Dan will join me for this. Now, of course, we're preparing for all three scenarios, but within the in-person and hybrid scenario, we also have this obligation to provide the voluntary distant learning for any families that decide to opt out of in-person learning. So what Dan and I are doing are working very closely with the building administrators to develop plans. We do have the technology, which we anticipated the possibility for this a few weeks ago, came forward with requests for additional hardware and software so we can provide some streaming of classes, but the devil's in the details. We are working with the K-5 administration, 612 administration, along with special ed to determine what would be the best way to service students who are staying home. We do have the technology to be able to do that. It's now figuring out, how we do that so that, the teachers who may be in the classroom with kids live, and then also having kids in the background who are listening in or in some way participating in those lessons. So there's more to come on that. We'll be providing an update at the beginning of next week on what those plans will specifically look like. Dan, did you want to chime in?
No, I mean, you basically touched upon the major points. You know, we had anticipated the technology, that we needed some technology. The technology is agile enough that it can be used in whatever scenario we're looking to do with the students who elect to do distance learning starting from the beginning of the year. It's just a matter of hashing out the details and then providing the proper professional learning to staff members so that they're comfortable with whatever scenario they're given.
Right.
Ken, it seems like, you know, out of all that we've learned through this pandemic, you know, we always thought that, you know, there are some things with respect to technology that would come out of this that would basically live on and be a real positive in terms of enhancing how we deliver education to our students. You know, and I think the board members have raised this, families have raised this as well, in terms of being able to live stream classes to those students that are home. And if there's one thing that, you know, should come out of this public health crisis, is the ability to deliver education remotely in ways that we thought wasn't possible before, but now are all of a sudden extremely possible. And that's something that I think the board members, as well as many of the families, feel that we should actually push forward on and see if we can actually make that happen in those places where it's appropriate.
Yes, and we're looking at that, and you know, there may be some things here that you know, we're just in a situation where we're going to be trying some new things, and we're going to need some patience and flexibility, you know, in working with our workforce as well, you know, working with them to help them to be able to do that. So there's be some training needs, but also, you know, as we work with the principals, we're going to be looking at, you know, what does that mode of streaming look like? Will students be able to chime in as part of that process with the regular class going on? You know, those kinds of things where you have to just kind of work out, you know, what are the details, what's feasible, and so that you can meet the needs of both the students who are at home and in the classroom. And that's new for us. So we're putting our heads together, and we will come back to you with some concrete plans.
Taffy, you had some questions.
Thank you, Tony. Of the 135 staff members that said they have a concern, it seems to me that, and you named off a few of what those concerns might be. Obviously, health concerns, childcare concerns, but those two concerns are implicate a different outcome. In other words, those teachers that have a concern about coming back to school in person have healthcare issues. Or health issues or health concerns, I'm assuming. Those teachers that are concerned about childcare, are they concerned about childcare because they need to be at home teaching and they have no one to look after their kids because their kids are not in school? I'm interested in the breadth of the concerns. I know you said you're going to go back with more pointed questions, but some are concerned about coming back and some are concerned about not coming back. Is that fair? In other words, not all, you couldn't say all 135 of those concerns are related to, say, having to come back and they have a concern about that. They may be half and half. It may be some that are concerned about not coming back and some are concerned about coming back. Can you just put some color to that?
Yeah, so there could be a concern, as you said, it could be about childcare, could be about their own personal health, maybe a pre-existing condition. Could be a concern about the health of a family member and then coming to work and then, you know, maybe communicating something to a family member. So, you know, we don't know specifically the breakdown or what specifically those issues are. So we are going back to all 135 with specific questions related to, if there are medical issues.
Thank you.
And the ADA forms that would need to be, completed. We've provided those. They'd have to have their provider complete those, and we have to work through that, just as we normally would with a staff member in accordance with the law. So, that's going to, I think that number, as we work through, and we know more as well about what the scenario is going to be, we'll have a better handle on specifics as to who will require an accommodation and how that will play out.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because the number 135 is alarming, but then when you consider that it could be broken down into 12 categories of concern, not all of which are about returning to school, the number may be more palatable and maybe more manageable. But
but to clarify the way, and we have to go back in and look, and we're doing that, but these are 135 who said they have concerns about returning. It was a poll structured on that.
Okay.
So we're going back in to dig into it with each of the individuals. The number will no doubt come way down, but if we have 5% of teachers out or other staff out, it becomes difficult to run the district in a normal day. And so, it's a significant number. Other districts are looking at 20, 30%. This is some 60% of the respondents said they have a concern about returning.
Oh, that was not made clear. Okay, I understand. Thank you.
So, but this is we have to protect the privacy.
Yeah.
But what we're doing is working through very carefully to protect all the employees, and it's all staff who respond. It's not just teachers or others. But we're going back with good legal guidance, with a very detailed survey, working very closely with the WTA on this, going back to each of the members who listed to sort out what it is, get that number as tight as possible, because to go where you're potentially heading, Taffy, some may have a legitimate reason not to come to work, but they could be deployed under the voluntary distance learning. So that's what we're trying to sort through.
Yeah, any concern is a valid concern. I'm not questioning that at all. It was not clear to me that when you said 135 have concerns, that it was really about returning. I would bet there are probably 100 staff that have concerns about not returning. But if that was the answer to the question of how do you feel, do you have any concerns about returning to school, that's good information. Listen, I'll just speak frankly. It would be crazy to think that anybody isn't concerned about returning. There's a pandemic. We all have concerns about returning. The question is, what are we going to do about it? So it sounds like you're on it, and I wanted some clarification on that. So thank you.
So Bill, why don't you continue then?
Yeah, I'll continue. So as we work through that, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Okay. So we'll continue to work through that and update you. And then finally, the last item on my update relates to calendar, and it's a follow-up to our last meeting. And obviously, staff training is a big part of preparing for the start of the school year. We do have plans for some training over the summer, facilitated by the curriculum leaders, media center specialists as well. But then we do need a significant amount of time to ramp up related to social emotional learning, to adjustments to the curriculum, to technology, new technology that we're using. So the recommendation that you have in the next item is that we add a full week at the beginning for teachers, which means that the start of school for students, we were looking at the Monday, August 31st, to give a full 5 days for teachers. And then there was the question that the board wanted to consider of whether we add even another day to take advantage of the flexibility that the state was giving us for 177 day school year versus 180, and front loading those days to take additionally the Monday. And I had mentioned that with feedback I had from the SILs and the WTA president that it would probably be wise to get the students in on that Monday and then use that additional day of flexibility on the Friday of that first week on September 4th. So that's a choice you have before you. But I did want the community to know that we do need that additional time front loaded to ramp up, and that we recommend taking advantage of that flexibility from the state.
Yeah. Ken, why don't we hold off on that discussion until the next agenda item? Okay.
Just framing that for now, and then we could talk.
Great.
That's my update.
Yeah, let me just tuck in an important calendar piece there. We're learning that a number of districts around us are going to restart with partial days. The rationale being that nobody's been in since March, and instead of coming back in a full opening or even a hybrid for that full time, is to ease back in. So that's something we may be bringing back to the board and the community. Right now, we are out front of our area districts in the amount of instructional time. We would be going forward with either the full or the hybrid. Instructional time is not necessarily a direct match between the quality, but that is important to us in Weston. But that is something we may be bringing back to the board to consider, is helping family students ease back in to school. That partial time could be valuable for staff and students because it's going to be a very new and different environment. Speaking of communications, Dan, this might be a moment to tuck in what we really are working hard to have ready for all families, all staff, as a critical communication mechanism. And that, let's just I think it'd be helpful for the board as we go through the rest of this discussion to know we're really thinking hard, and you're doing great work to give us a very focused communication tool.
Sure. So we've been working on the website, a COVID-19 section, and that will provide key information for residents and parents. We added a new, you should all be able to see my screen right now. I know it is a little bit small when it's shared out, but there's a new bullet item for COVID-19 resources. And within here, we've been trying to create links based on the state submitted school reopening plan that we did, and broken it down more into bullet points. So it's targeted information for families when they're looking for a specific piece of information. They can just click right on it and they can say, okay, I want to know more about transportation. They can click on transportation, give some information that was based on the plan, as well as some other bullet items. This is something that's going to be a living and breathing website. So we're working right now. The major piece is the frequently asked questions. We know there's going to be a lot of frequently asked questions from everybody. So we're in the process of building this. That's why it still says under construction. But we're looking to have this up and running by tomorrow afternoon, as well as more information on hygiene in the classroom and arrival and departure. But it goes off specifically into, what the different models are, breaking it down by building, the different scenarios that were submitted, broken down just to explain it. So it's a quick place for people to just see that information that they're looking for instead of having to sift through the entire reopening document. We figured this would be a lot better way. And any feedback as needed, we'll make changes to the website as needed. That's just a quick update on the website. If anybody had any questions or concerns about it.
Hi, this is Gina. I think this is fabulous. My one question is, do we need to have some version of this for our building level staff that answers their questions that maybe is not visible to like the full public as far as protocols, procedures, just making sure that our staff has like this information that they need to properly prepare and maintain their classrooms and all that, having something, a resource similar to this for them?
Sure, that's something that we could build either, directly on this website, or we can make it like an intranet kind of a thing where it's available to staff only, and we can build up, some resources for them also. Absolutely. That's a good idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Gina. That's critical.
Absolutely.
And we wanted you to see this now, and it's helpful to know it'll be live tomorrow. So everyone in the community can look at it, given how incredibly complex and emotional everything is right now, and both are only increasing the complexity and the emotion. Having some clear, definite places to go look and understand, we think is really important. So that's why I wanted to raise this up here. I thank, Dan DeVito, backed up by Meredith, Jen, and others, and Joanne for working so hard and so quickly on this. There's some nice cross-sector learning here. We went into a couple of different independent schools to look at what they've been doing, and we borrowed. But I hope you're impressed with this. It's really going to be living and active, and we can also do the within district support through this.
Yeah, I think the key is the fact that this is a living, breathing document that will evolve as our, as the specifics, start getting consolidated around the reopening plans, all the health and safety protocols, and so forth. And so I think this is great. I think this will be a great resource.
We want the staff, we want people to quickly be able to see the information that really is going to be the basis of their ultimate decision for what they're going to do for this school year. And so that's, the better we can target this information, the more informed everyone can be.
Dan, I think this is a great website with a lot of really helpful information on it. I had the opportunity to see it earlier at the task force, so I've had a few hours to think about it. And one part that I think we might want to consider including would be a tab where we could list and have by hyperlink all of the district level and building level communications that go out to parents. Because what I saw in a lot of the parent survey responses was that they appreciated the level of communication, but because it was coming from, some came from maybe the intermediate school, some came from the district, some came from Bill directly, that when they needed that information, they couldn't quite get it at their fingertips. So it might be good to have that centralized so people can access it more quickly.
That's a great point, and that's actually something we've already been working on in the back end. Meredith has been able to get us all previous communications. It's just a matter of me adding that as a button and putting it onto the website. So we'll see there'll be a section for like previous communications. We could set up another piece for current communications, and that way it's all in one location for everybody to find. But that is a really good point.
And perhaps by school too, related to which school. So I don't need to sift through all the communications from all the schools. I know to go to the middle school, tab.
Absolutely.
On the question of communication, and this we may have to let Dan wrap up before I ask this question, but can the administration comment on how they are involving the staff in the decisions that are being made here around opening? I know that there's a couple of representatives on the task force, but to what degree are the staff being consulted for their guidance and then communicated with as we coming down really to the 11th hour here? We're almost in August. How are they involved and feeding back their thoughts and preparing themselves?
Yeah, I'll be very clear on this. We have 4 ways, particularly with the teachers, we're engaging, but that would reach out to other staff. So on the task force, we take the task force seriously. That's an advisory body. It's a roundtable every 2 weeks, highly representative from all staff groups, administrators and staff, to give input and feedback. For the teachers, then, Ken and I are meeting every week with Doug Pregman as well as Eric Fisher, who's the CA rep. And that's a very active, intensive conversation. So for example, tomorrow we're going to sit and begin, digging into now that this 4 sets of approaches is out there. Third, the SILs, who are teachers, are actively involved building out what's here. And in fact, we're increasing their time this summer. That'll be one of the COVID budget expenses we have to look at to increase their time on this. But they are active leading teachers across the district. And fourth, each building principal, it has to be voluntary for contract reasons, but each principal has run meetings this summer, some in the last week, to be sharing ideas and plans as they emerge to get input and feedback. So there are 4 paths to involvement, and particularly now that we have this submission by the state, that gives us a base to begin building out from to say, as we dig more deeply into a full opening, what's this mean to you? As we dig more deeply into hybrid, because there's a lot of room here yet. What's it mean to you as we move back, if we do into full distance learning? What's that mean to you? And this ongoing piece of providing the voluntary distance learning, what's that mean to you? So given that complexity of this, I know there are different points of view on this out there, but we've built 4 paths that are constant and active for teacher input, AFSCME input, other input as it's necessary. And we'll keep on that, and it will intensify as we move out over the next week or so. Statewide, the teachers have been incredibly active. I do not think the governor would have had the press conference he did today to begin bringing flexibility into the districts if the various associations had not been very active with the governor, saying we as teachers are concerned about the full back end. And so it's very active, it's very constant, and we'll keep that going. The other thing out there that you should be aware of is the unions are looking to do what's called impact negotiation. That's their right. There's decisions that are made by management and the board. Then there is what's the impact of those decisions. And so statewide, that is now happening, and that's their right. We haven't started that yet in Weston, but there is that interest. So we are looking at when that might happen, but that's a formal state protected collective bargaining process and step. So we do need to pay close attention to that.
Thank you, Bill. I was interested in hearing that, you know, the 4 paths you've got, you know, the union rep, the teacher reps on the task force, then the burden is on them to communicate to the staff who are not involved in any of those channels?
Well, everything that goes out goes to all staff. I'm communicating, I mean, everything that's come out of my office goes to all staff as well as to families. The plan, for example, went to Doug Pregman the night before it went widely out. We had been talking with Doug about it, but we're communicating out actively. So we're not putting the burden on them to come to us. And indeed, the outreach by the principals, which is one of the best ways within each building to be reaching out. And again, we want to make sure we have you talking directly with the principals, you know, this evening, but that's critical outreach there. So we are sending things out. We're going out, as you will, in this environment. There are going to be different points of view. And at some point, there are going to be some very difficult decisions that have to get made as we think about, you know, how we're going to deliver. I mean, there's a strong view with the CEA on the use of cameras in classrooms. Every district around us is going to be using to attempt to stream out. But that's something that's going to be a point of discussion. And I think it'll be a healthy discussion, but it's going to be a point of discussion with most bargaining units about, is that something that we can do? I think, you know, but there's a host of those kind of questions we have to look at. The care we're giving to the 135, not all teachers, but all our staff, the 135 who said, in a pandemic, cannot come back, our careful outreach to them in coordination, at least with the WTA, and we've reached out to AFSCME to say, how do we coordinate with you on this outreach? We're working as actively as we can to you know, be working with. The reality is, you know, there are going to be decisions that management has to make, a board has to make, and then how do you support teachers and others through that? But you want them to know about the decisions, hear about them before they're actual decisions.
And be involved in them. Yeah.
And we've been working really hard on that. And again, what went into the state, as you all know very well, that's 3 scenarios from which one may be it, or a combination, with lots of detail yet to be figured out, even as we head to August 1.
Okay, great. I just, thank you.
That's a great question, and it's a great question. Do you want to shift to the principals at this point? And I'll come back later on the public health indicators.
Yeah.
I want to make sure we get them involved talking with you, because I know that matters to you.
Yeah, I think the public health indicators are going to be obviously the driving force, but conditional on the public health indicator and advice from, you know, our medical experts, then we're going to have to pick a mode of opening that optimizes the delivery of the curriculum conditional on the public health environment. So maybe before we kind of go back to the public health issues and how we're planning to address those and inform the board and the administration on, maybe we can talk about the especially the full reopening and the hybrid plans, and talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each.
Which do you want to do now? Do you want to do the public health or go into the pros and cons with the principles of the two of the three options?
Whichever you think is, however you want the flow to go.
Why don't I do the public health piece quickly?
Okay.
The state assignment was actually a good assignment. It was an incredible challenge, but it put in one place, be it, questions about staff involvement, but also forced us to set criteria for how you as a board can hold us accountable. So if in that document, page 33 to 34, that's where we laid out, it's the top section within the district reopening plans, because first and foremost on the reopening, as you've said, is health guidance and indicators for decisions. So it's really critically important, while this is written for the state, it's also written for the board and the entire Weston community, to say in here that as of June 29th, we were told by the state, and many of you heard me now say this a lot, and the governor actually repeated it today in the press conference, we were told that we would be given by the state, by the public health experts statewide, what are those indicators, what are those triggers, what are those thresholds, and yes, figured out locally with your health district and your local medical advisor, but a statewide sense of the guardrails, to put it in plain English. We don't have those yet. The governor today in the press conference committed to that. We'll see. We know that the superintendents and others have been pressing hard to get that help. We know that local public health directors in unison with us have been pressing hard to get that. But we're looking to get that. And I grounded that issue on page 33 here. What's very important going on to page 33 to 34, and everybody can go read this, is here exactly is what we will have. So while waiting for the state, we're not waiting. We will develop and the date I've given is by August 7th, which is well before opening, we will have the actual plans as you see them here, page 33 to 34, against those criteria. It'll be developed with Mark Cooper, director of the Westport Weston Health District, and it'll be developed with Dr. Laura Marks. We already know what we're going to put on paper. So, for example, and I won't go on at too length, if Janie Doe or Freddie Smith becomes ill or appears to be ill during the day, we immediately have that child go to an isolation room, monitored, immediately have the family contacted, that child leaves the school. We then begin to work with Mark Cooper and Dr. Marks on what are the contact that student may have had. So we can begin to figure out from a cohort standpoint what has been the potential effects. That child cannot come back to school until we've had a test done. And that's not for us to do. The decision made that we as a district will not be in the testing business in this regard, but it be a COVID test and or a flu test. Because as we get into flu season, a lot of what might seem to be COVID could be flu. But it'll be very detailed in terms of what's looked at, the communication path and all the rest. But by August 7th, you and the community will have that, and it'll be against the criteria listed here on page 33 and 34. Cancellation of classes, be it classes, cohorts, whole building, entire district, that'll be done in very close coordination with Mark Cooper and Dr. Laura Marks. And indeed, our decision in March to go out, while some looked back and thought, well, Wilton is closing, but we're not, that was based on good guidance from Mark Cooper. He said, Wilton needs to close, but you don't need to close yet, Weston. And that changed pretty fast, as you recall, but that was done in very close coordination with Mark Cooper and Laura Marks. I should put in here now, because soon you as a board should be hearing from Mark Cooper, hearing from Dr. Marks. Some of these conversations are easier on a private basis, which I'm doing, but I need to let you know, Dr. Marks at this point is very concerned about the full opening, because she is a pediatrician, is quite conscious of the social distancing, and is worried that as she hears, if we have 3/4 of our buildings, you can't get to the 6-foot social distancing, she's concerned about that. They've also helped us on something that may come up later on mask breaks. It's 100% masks all the time, but we are looking to try and build in when might a child have a break from that mask. So last week, and we will have something out Thursday morning to all families about face shields. And we know through Dr. Laura Marks and the CDC that face shields alone are not helpful here, but face shields with a mask are helpful. But we think there's a way to still have face shields as a way to give a mask break, which we'll have out to all families Thursday. So that gives them plenty of time to obtain things. But let me stop there. I'm giving you some very particulars, but tying it back to very close work with Dr. Marks, Mark Cooper, while we're still waiting for the state to give us guidance on the guardrails. If they never do, we'll still be ready.
Now, Bill, let's assume the state doesn't give us guidance on the guardrails. None of us on the board, nor the administration or public health experts, we're going to be faced with a series of decisions on the mode of reopening. And so what we're going to need as a board, I assume, is going to be a public health and medical assessment as to, we're going to need someone's opinion from a medical perspective on each of the modes of reopening, so that we can actually, as a board, have that information from which to assess whether, let's, for example, go full or hybrid, simply because the decision really primarily will be based on the public health situation.
Right, and I think we're getting that sense right up to what's here. Mark Cooper's reviewed the entire plan the 3 scenarios. Mark Cooper's reviewed it. He's comfortable with everything that's here. He is also concerned about the social distancing, but he's comfortable so far what's here. Dr. Marks is also very comfortable with what's here, other than she's very concerned about the social distancing issue. In fact, Friday she called me and said, Bill, where are you on this full reopen? Because she's very worried about that in terms of now we're seeing an uptick in teenage infection rates. The governor talked about that today in the press conference and things like that. So you can be assured at the right moment when you need their input, it's there. I think it's sorting through with 2 professionals how they want to work with you as to being quote unquote the decision makers or the advisors. But they've been very, very active with us. They've seen everything here in these 3 scenarios, and they've begun to raise where they have questions and concerns. That's why I gave that very specific about masks and shields. They've weighed in there very actively, all the way then through what we'll build out as the protocols.
Yep. Yeah, my feeling is that we're going to need to hear from them as advisors. Right?
And they're very prepared to do that.
Any other questions from the board?
No, I guess it is a question. I mean, a lot of where we're going, the nitty-gritty details, is kind of where people are chomping at the bit for that level of information, for our staff to know what's coming their way, for our families to know what to prepare for. So I guess, Tony, we've talked about it a couple times, like what's going to be our process and our timeline for working our way through. I mean, it's a mountain of detail that some is hinging on us making a decision. Some is, we need information, but we have families and staff who are craving like detail. This is how it's going to work. This is where you're going to go do this. This is where you're going to go do that. So like, what's going to be the process going forward? How many meetings are we going to be scheduling so our families can know when to log in to get this information? Like,
Yeah,
I mean, I completely appreciate we're still waiting on information, but we're trying to move ahead. But I mean, we're down basically to 4 weeks till school, and we've got to start nailing some stuff down.
Yeah, and I agree. And from a board perspective, I think we spoke about potentially putting 2 meetings a week, if we need them, on the calendar to continually be updating and understanding where we are. My expectation, and I don't know if the administration shares this, but my expectation is that we have to make a decision in the first week of August, because I think families, students, staff need to be get prepared for what's to come in the fall. I don't know, Bill, do you have a view here?
I mean, that's what we've been pointing towards, that we purposely wrote the document that way, the long cover email. We wrote it that way. And if that's where the board is, I mean, we're working actively to get all the details answered we can. We still, as of today, at 4 o'clock from the governor and commissioner, we're still needing to work 3 scenarios. Other states, they've started to whittle that down to help schools plan because it is so complex. Again, as I said at the beginning, some of the pieces of this overlap. So whether you're in one scenario or the other, the work needs to get done. For example, the public health indicators certainly carry across the first 2. The distance learning carries across all 3. So there are some efficiencies, but I would say early August for sure. We would want to have a decision. We're trying to get clarity on, did the governor today give us flexibility? Because at one point in the press conference, he said, well, 2 weeks before the start of school, we want to give you clarity. But by the end of the press conference, we had the commissioner under press scrutiny, thank you for freedom of the press and their good work, saying, well, no, we're giving the decision soon. Well, because that relates to what you need to decide. If the state is still saying all back in, that's the law, that starts to guide your decision making, unless you want to go a different path.
But Gina, I do appreciate that, because even if we do make a decision, let's say in the first week of August, whether it's full back in or hybrid, I think staff, students, and families will want to see the nitty gritty of the protocols and how we're looking to operate the schools to either be comfortable or not to send their students back to school, or whether the staff is comfortable coming back. So I do appreciate that. A decision alone is not clarity. It's everything that goes along with it, which is all the protocols and triggers that are going to give ultimately the community, the staff, and the students comfort as to whether that mode of operation is something that they're comfortable with or not. So I agree that the detail has to be filled in soon after that, because the decision alone is not enough.
The only thing, since we're on this topic about communication with staff and families, I brought this up in the communication committee a few months ago. I'm going to just speak for myself here when I say this. I don't like it when I see communication that has 2 staff and families. I think staff needs to find out about this information, understand what's in the works, understand how administration is thinking prior to families, and here's why. I think staff needs time to digest the expectation from them. And they need time to understand, okay, is this feasible? What are my concerns, et cetera? And then have that opportunity to bubble it up to administration before administration then communicates it out to the families. I think we owe that to the staff. When I hear that the staff, hasn't heard about something, or they're hearing about it at the same time as families, I think that they need to find out before families.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely agree.
Any other questions, comments on some of the public health and safety issues?
Oh, just this is a specific question when we start working with our health advisors. Will they be recommending a specific type of COVID test that families have to adhere to? I mean, like, are we going to be that specific with our requirements for reentry as to the type of test our families take?
No, they won't be that specific, but where they can be helpful is, for example, if we're referring, is there a way we can refer families out to certain locations for testing, things like that. But we'll see. I mean, the advantage of Westport, Weston is Mark Cooper's working with 2 districts. So we can see if we get some more clarity, because as you can see, there's immense amount of detail and complexity here. Before we move on, I do want to make sure that Tracy Edwards, because she wasn't here for you last week, I know some of you want to talk with her. So before we go to the principals, we may want to speak, have her give you an update from the PPS area.
And I'm sorry, Tracy, to interrupt you, and because I'm dying to hear from you as well. Bill, can I just ask one last question, and that's a short one, and I probably missed it as I was eating my dinner here. Did you say the exact date? And I think that everyone listening would like to hear it. The exact date that the decision finally will be made as to how we're going back. what is that deadline for making that decision?
Well, I think that's working out with the board. I think that I heard Tony say he would hope that you as a board would make your decision during the first week of August. That's coming at us pretty fast.
Yeah, I want to say, yeah, I just want us as a group to say to the public, when will they have an answer? Tony, do you think we can get to that by the end of the first week of August?
But if I may, just one thing, Tony, I mean, that's a good goal. We'll have to see where the governor is and the commissioner is. And even with that decision, we still may be in a very different place a couple weeks after that. But I think that clarity, still with a lot to get figured out, I mean, that makes sense.
I mean, I guess I'm trying to get to, families getting their heads around and coming to terms with the decision that this board makes, not 4 days before school opens, like I think we owe them that too.
Yeah, Taffy, if you look at the plans that were submitted to the state, if you really take a look at it and you include distance learning all the way to full, there's 16 permutations.
Right, I've read it.
So going from 16 to 1, right? I think that we want to do it as quick as possible. And my feeling is that we have to ultimately whittle this down to a manageable 1 early in August. I mean, that's the goal, because I don't think we have much option. I mean, everyone needs to be prepared. Now, things may change. Who knows? Second week in August or third week in August, we may be in a completely different place. But we have to basically pick a path very soon in very early August that we're all going to be working towards.
Yeah, I think that's encouraging to listeners, and I think that's the right approach. Okay, I just wanted to put that out there.
Just on that same note, I think it's really important that we frame this issue accurately, which is, I don't see this so much as a decision from the Board of Education. I mean, this is something that, our governor, as of now, is mandating. That may change, and we'll see what that guidance is. And we are relying on the advice of medical and healthcare professionals to set up parameters and guidelines for us to apply the scenario that meets those parameters. So let's take the subjectivity out of this discussion, because this is not we feel this way or we feel that way. This is we're relying on the opinion and the legal guidance of our governor, or we are relying on the guidelines set by medical and healthcare professionals, and we'll do what's appropriate for Weston.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Yeah. I view this as as a series of decision points, right? You have your public health advice, which will then lead to us to picking a mode of opening that optimizes the delivery of our curriculum, subject to the public health and medical advice. And then we basically, once we do that, we have an entire support structure that we have to adhere to around that, including a transportation model, how we operate our facilities, and so forth. And then, which we haven't spoken about, which is finally working with the Board of Finance to basically make sure that everyone understands what the economics are going to be around this, right? So, I view that as a series of steps that we need to take in fairly quickly.
I mean, I think this alone, the fleshing out of what it's going to take to get to that final decision, is also really important information for the public to have heard. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And it is so real time. I'm looking at a legal opinion I just received that, based on what the governor said today, he has given flexibility to the districts to make the decision. So we'll try and get more guidance on that. That also relates to how we work with all of our bargaining units, because many of them, because that's also then on the list, because decisions are made, and if there's a change in practice, there may be that right for negotiations. So that becomes a whole nother piece of this. A number of districts have started negotiations around potential plans. So that's another aspect of this. And given we only have several weeks before school starts, that's why we're literally in real time getting that opinion that today the governor said you have the flexibility. And so, if in early August, the board here can say, here's our best bet, I think that will help. So.
Bill, you might want to, with the principals, go through some of the full hybrid pros and cons and a little bit more detail around that.
Let's not forget about Tracy.
Yeah, well, why don't we have Tracy?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Tracy.
Because that cross-cuts so much
Yeah.
of the work.
Perfect.
Sure. So good evening, everybody. I want to step you through a few areas, and I think it makes logical sense to start with special education first, because that impacts a subgroup of our population, and then build out to some areas that impact basically every child in the Weston Public Schools. From a special education standpoint, it's important for you to know that we are actually still awaiting the formal special education state guidance. I was in a meeting last week. They are going to be providing specific guidance about specific populations. We are doing our best to anticipate what that guidance will be, and I'll talk through some of that as I step through the major ideas. Consistent with what you probably heard during distance learning in the spring, we have an obligation to provide students with a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. That obligation doesn't go away no matter what schedule or structure we're following. That being said, there is built within that flexibility for how we go about meeting individual student needs within the different models. And I think a key idea here that we have to remember is that our identified special education students are first and foremost general education students, which means that when you're hearing about the different models and schedules that are being proposed at the building level, the special education schedules for those students are going to be interfaced within those plans, meaning a majority of students, if we're in a hybrid model, and they have a special education plan, will be following the hybrid schedule and getting supports within that plan. The same is said for distance learning, and of course, full opening, everyone will be in school receiving services pretty similar to what was happening prior to closure, only with lots of new health and safety guidelines. Within that, we need to be thinking about individual needs of students, and for the purposes of this meeting, we're talking much more big picture, but there are individual decisions that go into a lot of the planning that we do. One of those individual decisions is around re-entry. So right now we're working to identify students who might require a re-entry plan, meaning thinking more specifically about the structures and supports that will be required to help that student transition back into school. Another individual decision that will be made, we certainly can't make broad decisions about programming based on a student's disability category. But there are students within our schools who have the severity of their disability or the magnitude of their service needs requires us to be thinking in a different way about their program. I am not talking about the majority of our identified special education population. In fact, I'm talking about, at this point, a pretty small minority of that population. They might be following a different schedule or a different program than the rest of the student population. And that decision is made, again, on an individual basis, and it's done because that student's needs require us to be doing something more and something different beyond just their programming in conjunction with the regular school schedule. I have been in communication, that we're facing a transition with our elementary level assistant director. I've been working very closely with our assistant director at the middle school and high school level, and have also been in communication with our yet to start elementary assistant director about some of these conversations. Conversations have also been happening with building principals and, even individual student teams. We're getting to that point right now. Knowing again that, as we've talked about in this whole meeting, there's guidance and information that's changing daily. And so we're going to need to think flexibly about this, I imagine, for at least the next couple of weeks. Technology access is going to be critically important for all students. And that's going to be a way for us to optimize supports, whether we're in a hybrid model or whether we have to go to full-on distance learning at some point again. If we are in distance learning, families might remember, if they have a child with an IEP, that we talked about continued education opportunity plans. Within that model, those plans will continue. It basically outlines how we address supports and services without any in-person instruction. Within the plan, there are guidelines around parent visitation. The important piece for that from a special education, and I'll also tie in 504 here, is that our parent meetings, including PPTs, including 504 meetings, will continue to be held virtually. That's actually, from the information I've gathered up to this point, been a pretty successful model. And so that's just the best way for us to be connecting with families if they're not coming to the building at this point. There is a significant need for continued collaboration between general education and special education that will be ongoing. I'll also add that the guidance that I'm sharing about special education plans is very consistent with the guidance that is in place for 504 plans. We want to be providing those accommodations and those supports as much as possible, and certainly it will look much more similar the more that we are physically in school doing in-person instruction. We've talked a lot about cohorting, and I just want to make all of you aware that when we're thinking about cohorting, that's obviously a very important health and safety consideration. There's also, though, an academic component to all of the planning that's happening, and there are some services and supports that are better served by removing students from a cohort and then allowing them to re-enter. And I'll give you just a really concrete example. In some cases, we have students who receive reading support outside of the classroom in a small group. We've talked a lot about this, and we do want to be able to continue with some of those supports where we feel like that's the best way to provide an academic opportunity. And so within this plan, and I'm not going to step through every detail in this meeting, I outlined some specific considerations from a health and safety standpoint that students and staff will need to engage in when they are leaving and re-entering a cohort, basically around hand washing and social distancing. We will be keeping track of those, I'll call them sub-cohorts for the purposes of contact tracing, but that is part of the recommended plan at this point. And we have talked to our medical advisors about doing that and what are the key considerations. There are also staff members who provide, due to the nature and severity of a child's disability, a lot of hands-on support with hygiene, supports with activities of daily living. There are specific health and safety considerations for staff members engaging in those activities. We've purchased some additional PPE for them that's above and beyond what they would be wearing under more normal circumstances. So that's a big piece by itself with lots of little details supporting that work. And again, I think much of the guidance that I just stepped through is very similar for students with a 504 plan. It also parallels the plans and considerations we have for students who are English language learners. So we have obligations to be providing English language support and also access to the general education curriculum. Those obligations exist whether we're in full in-person, hybrid, or distance learning. And we will continue to find ways to do that. Again, distance learning looking different than in-person and hybrid, where we have the ability to interact directly with students and provide small group support as well. There's communication that happens for families who have children within those plans that will all continue as well. Also being mindful that we have some students
who might be dually identified as English language learners and special education students. And there are supports and services that are offered in both of those areas that I just described. A group beyond those groups, we're sort of framing as vulnerable populations. So these are students who have health conditions that might require accommodations. We are certainly aware of students who have needs in that area, but we are also in the middle of a pandemic. And so there's the possibility that there are students who have not been previously identified as having concerns or needs from a health and safety standpoint that we might need to be thinking about upon return. And certainly we'd encourage families to reach out if something has changed over the summer and they feel like additional considerations will be needed going into the school year. I've been in communication with our nursing team around, so now we're getting more broad as I'm talking through, about how we're going to manage information about student absences. And so again, I'm not going to step through each of the criteria within the plan, but there's a section in the plan about reporting illnesses that's going to look a little bit different this school year so that we can gain information. You know, last year in September, if your child was sick, we probably weren't very interested in what bus they were riding. And now that's a critical piece of information. What cohort, classroom teacher, that will all be included in that process moving forward. And then the most broad category, and probably, you know, one of the most important things we'll talk about all night, is the social emotional learning aspect of the work that's happening now and certainly at the start of the school year, which is going to be critical for everyone. I think we're all mindful that certain students had greater challenges with distance learning than other students, but coming back to school is going to be a significant shift in routine for every adult, every child, everyone who's involved in our district. And so there are programs that we're using at various levels. I know you've heard about the work with Ruler and DBT. That work will continue. And I think in conjunction with that, especially at the start of school, there's going to be an increased emphasis on relationships and routines and making school motivating and engaging and, you know, just trying to reestablish the community that everyone has had a lot of time and space from at this point. And that will be a consideration from, you know, the professional learning that we've talked about for staff at the very start of the school year, but also definitely an emphasis when our students return to their classrooms, especially in light of the fact that, you know, the conditions are going to look different. It's going to feel different. We want them to feel comfortable and welcome. So those are the broad strokes of a number of key areas where work is happening at this point and will continue to be evolving as we move forward.
Thank you, Tracy. Questions, comments for Tracy?
Well, Tracy, I just wanted to welcome you. It's our first chance to have you at a monthly board meeting since you joined us early this month and talk about like just hitting the ground running. So just as plans finalize for how school is going to function, when is the new assistant director going to be starting? Because I guess my question is going down the lines, if we have IEPs in place for students, once we know how school is actually going to function, you're going to have to adjust those IEPs as needed. When is the new assistant director starting so we have our full full group of people to handle all of that?
Let me address, I'll answer that question for you, but let me address something that you just said within your question about adjusting IEPs. And that's a really great point. As was the case for distance learning in the spring, we don't actually adjust IEPs for the different schedules and circumstances around this public health crisis. So I briefly mentioned the continued education opportunity plans. That was a separate document from the IEP, and it talked about how we're going to implement the IEP to the greatest extent possible.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you.
Sure. Maggie is our assistant director at the elementary level. She is starting next week. I have been in communication with her already, though, about a variety of topics and things related to reopening. So it's not like she's going to be walking in sort of having to orient herself, and she's ready to go. I will say that for both all in, which is basically our more normal schedule, and hybrid, we're really trying to maximize our opportunities to implement that IEP as it was initially designed for regular in-person learning. And credit to the assistant principals and building principals for a lot of work that's happening around scheduling, thinking about how to maximize cohorts and opportunities for that kind of instruction. So I am not expecting that we're going to be scrambling to revise 250 programs 3 weeks before school opens. A majority of students will be accessing their supports and services within the context of the building schedule for wherever they attend school. There is, again, that specific, I would say, subset of our special education population who will require some more direct conversations. And we have started planning for those students, and we have had, there's lots of layers to their programming. And so that communication will be happening. Maggie will be around for that to happen. And Martine certainly at the middle and high school level.
Thank you.
Anything else for Tracy?
I'm just, sorry, Melissa, you want to go?
No, go ahead, Hillary.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak a little bit more about the social emotional piece, because I know everybody's got this anxiety going into it. So in terms of like professional development, like, do you have anything in mind? Do you have any plans for parents before the kids go to school? Like, can you just give us a general plan, since it's heavy on everybody's brain?
Yeah, so I think one of the themes of our conversations, and I think it came up even in the task force meeting this morning, there are questions about assessments and gathering student information, and we certainly want to have up-to-date information about how our students are performing. But we've talked a lot about those early weeks being about much more than that. Much more about helping students connect with one another. It's going to look very different. We've talked about students needing to wear masks. We've talked about the concept of social distancing. So there's going to need to be a lot of instruction and support about how students connect with each other, and especially at the younger levels, how they connect with their teacher, which is usually done in a much more hands-on sort of way. I mean, think about a preschool classroom. Laura and I have talked about how that's going to look very different. Students aren't going to be sharing materials. But then how do we build community within that classroom? How do we make students feel connected to each other? How do we make them feel comfortable? And then I think the second part of that is there's support that's needed for teachers to be teachers, but there's also support that's needed for staff and their own social emotional well-being, and reconnecting really with each other, and the work that they do day in and day out in their classrooms, and also in collaboration with each other. So, I think we're in the preliminary stages, to be honest with you, of mapping out that August PD, but those are the kinds of themes that we're thinking about. It's going to be a key part of the work. And, I think as much as we can help our our students, whatever age the children are, feel as comfortable as possible, which I think involves getting them prepared for the new reality, having them practice wearing masks, letting them know what school is going to look like when they return, and most importantly, providing them with reassurance that, yeah, we're gonna make this work. Those are all critical pieces, especially for families, leading up to reopening. I think we're all, as someone said earlier in the meeting, nervous about reopening. We're in the middle of a pandemic, but we want the message to our children to be that we have a good plan, we're here for you, and we're going to make this a successful school year.
Hi, Tracy. Welcome. Talk about perfect timing, right? To join in the thick of things. I wonder if there's an opportunity, and if you see anything with amongst your colleagues from other schools, if there's anything that we can start to send out to parents now, just to echo what Hillary said. I think it's on the forefront of all parents' minds in terms of how to handle this. And continuing to give parents tools for their toolkit before school starts, whether that be resources via links, whether that be seminars already out there, whether that be maybe even calling a speaker in and doing another Zoom event. I know that we did one, I think back in April, May, if I remember correctly, via Zoom. Mike organized it. Is there an opportunity for that we can start that now? And do you kind of see any of your colleagues in other districts or licensed professionals hosting some of these things?
That's a great question. Sort of the idea of having a speaker come in is not an idea that I've heard in the last couple of weeks. I honestly think people are so focused on the details and the nitty gritty. I think that's certainly a good consideration. I can also say that there are a lot of resources. And to your point, I think we can share some of that out. I'm even thinking of some resources that I shared with staff members working in ESY around wearing masks. And there might be just some guidance from a health and safety standpoint too, in conjunction with the social emotional supports. And maybe that can even be, it might even already be a tab on the website that Dan's created. If not, I'm sure we can work together on that and just make links available for families about a variety of different topics. There is a lot of literature out there, some of it more user-friendly than others, but people might want to access it at different levels.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I mean, it may be a bit, Tony, of a good segue to the principals, because the
Sure.
SEL is very strong, and they can, I think, speak to that as well. And we have a lot of really good footing in this district now through our work, through the Ruler Project, through Yale, but also in particular the DBT. So that might be something picking up on these questions, Tracy. So we build on the DBT piece and all the rest, because that's been especially powerful. But each of the principals is well positioned to think about that. And I certainly know from the task force meeting this morning, a lot of the response was first SEL, SEL, SEL. So I don't know if you want to swing to talk with the principals now. And I think particularly it's this details understanding full in as opposed to hybrid. And if whatever time that 7:30 legal advisory as the governor did give us flexibility, if that, we're sort of building towards something different than we were at 6 o'clock. So
Sure. Okay. Yeah, let's move. Bill, I'll let you kind of lead this.
So I don't know if, I think initially was sort of thoughts of questions you may have. If there aren't initially any, it may be, I think Lauren, Patty, just sort of as you look at the full on and hybrid, what sort of stands out as some important distinctions. And then similarly, if we moved up the ladder, I mean, the alternative is simply if board members have questions for the principals.
So we're certainly prepared to answer some questions. Patty and I have been working very closely on the elementary plans. And as Gina said so aptly earlier on in the meeting, it is just a mountain of details. We are both very concerned about the full opening and the implications of that. I mean, I think a good example is, we're meeting virtually right now with you because it's not safe to be together, yet we're looking at trying to put together a plan to bring 500, 600 people back into a building. I did want to point out that I know there's been some discussions about the social distancing at the primary grades. Because of class size guidelines in K and 1, we are able to, in the classrooms, separate students with 6 feet in K and 1 only, not second grade, not the whole building, because those class sizes are larger. We can't fit the desks in the classroom. Something Patty and I have been talking a lot about in terms of the social emotional needs is either plan that we open in or any of the scenarios that we have physically students in the building, it's going to look very different than what our students are used to. We basically will have classrooms with desks all facing the front of the room, which is not a typical elementary classroom current, in this day and age. So there will be some work around that and trying to work with the teachers on building community and making it is engaging and child friendly as possible. The full reopening is very restrictive. It does not give us a lot of room to move, students around when they're really, all in a classroom. We can barely fit the K and 1 in there, and then 2nd through 5th grade, it is a little problematic. We cannot fit them 6 feet apart. Which is why we spend a little more time on the hybrid model. The big difference between the 2 hybrid models is really the length of the day. We have talked a lot about what school will look like and for students to be in masks all day long. We know as adults when we do it, we do need breaks. So we're trying to work through what that will look like during the school day. The scheduling is very complex. We do share staff across the districts, so we are going to be making a lot of adjustments and changes to the way the curriculum is delivered in either the full opening or the hybrid based on the needs of the way we schedule the buildings.
Laura, we read the words on the page and we hear you. Maybe, you could describe what a full school day would look like for a student, right?
In the hybrid model?
No, just the full. Just what because I think while everyone is while we all want to go back to school, everyone wants to go back to normal. Full it sounds great, but what is a school day actually like under these kinds of guidelines in a if we try to get everyone back to Hurlbut, let's say?
Yeah, it will look very different than it has in the past for the elementary schools, and I'm sure for the middle and high school. I'll let those principals speak to that. But with students having to be 6 feet apart at their desks, typically in an elementary classroom, we have students grouped in cooperative groups, side by side, facing each other, interacting throughout the day. That will look very different. We won't be gathering students on the classroom meeting area to have a class discussion because they wouldn't be socially distanced. Usually we call it knee to knee, eye to eye. They're right up next to each other, shoulder to shoulder on the carpet area for meetings and discussions. And that will have to happen at their desks spread out. The elementary classrooms will not be full of all of the areas in the classrooms that students rotate around to just because we don't have the room for it. To be able to socially distance students in a classroom, really all we can put in there are the desks. We won't have students moving throughout the building and mixing cohorts like we do at recess and lunch, which we typically do. If you have classes that, typically would be moving around the building to go to a special area class, we can't have all that interaction in the hallways. So the students will be based in their homeroom with their, with their classroom teacher, and the special area teachers will be coming to them. Patty and I have been talking a lot about how to build in some breaks and get the students outside, moving around out of the building more, multiple times a day, for movement, for hopefully some mask breaks. And, fortunately for Hurl, I can speak specifically to Hurl, but, we have a good sized campus. So we have a lot of areas that we're already planning for. And we will have, that's another schedule challenge for both of our buildings. We're going to have to, have people designated to certain areas at certain times. So you don't have 5 classes showing up in the same outdoor area trying to get a break. We have a little more flexibility in the ELC, and I did just want to circle back to Hillary's question initially, because I think I did not speak to the threes class, which I think is where the question may have developed from. It may look a little bit small on paper, but that's because students who are turning 3 enter our program. They leave the state birth to 3 program and they enter the Hurlbut ELC on their 3rd birthday. So that's more like a rolling admission. They may turn 3 in September and they start with us. They may turn 3 in November and they come in then. And we do have quite a few students that we're looking at coming out of birth to 3 that will be in that class this year. So I think that number, Hillary, I'm glad you asked that, because I think it doesn't capture all of the ELC program. Patty, did you want to, the other just thing I wanted to point out, which is probably on everybody's mind this week too, because of the weather, not all of Hurlbut is air conditioned. So in addition to, planning for keeping the students socially distanced in classrooms, we also need areas for them to be, should those classrooms become too hot. And that is a consideration and a concern of mine, that if we fully open with all of our students, it's just another pressure point that we need to work through. One of the hybrid models with fewer students, you have a lot more opportunities to move students around if you're only moving 10 rather than 20, 21, 22, or 23, or, 24 potentially in 2nd grade. All right, I'll pause. So
no, I was gonna say our plans are very similar. The same thing. The size constraints are really evident at WIS. Our classrooms are all the same size. It's the same thing. We'll have to move all the furniture out. The other concern that I have is even just moving along hallways and entrances and arrival and dismissal, and having those protocols in place, making sure that we can get everybody in safely and out again safely. And down hallways. We're fortunate we have a really nice sized cafeteria, so we will be able to rotate them through. They will not all be eating in the cafeteria though every day. We just cannot get all students in there. We'll just make a schedule, sort of like our recess schedule, where they will get out sometimes and in sometimes. So they'll be eat in the classroom or in the cafeteria. It will be really different, and they will really be confined to their classrooms, and everyone will be coming into them, which is a very different experience for our students. And we'll just have to, as Tracy said, a lot of it's going to be about routines and protocols, and using the bathrooms and the hallways, but really a strong emphasis. The positive on being all in is that we're all there every day, and really giving them more time to build community and to build relationships and to build those protocols, and obviously more curriculum, so more content. So. But really the focus on the social emotional is really going to be huge, whatever option that we choose to follow. That's all in.
Yeah. How, just the trade-offs now between all in and hybrid, where, a little bit of the details of what a hybrid day looks like, and then, maybe where the pros and cons are. I mean, you started addressing that a little bit. Yeah.
Right. So fewer students in the building. So we have 50% fewer students in our building, which will make moving around and going to the different recess areas and to the cafeteria will be greater opportunities to do that. But it won't be a full class where they're forming that class community all at once. It'll be in half and half. I'm trying to think of some of the other areas. I mean, one of the advantages of having 10 students, obviously it's more teacher time within those students, working on curriculum and building that community. Obviously the negatives is that students are in only half the time versus full time. And the differences between the two hybrids is one's a full day where the students will be in a full, when they're in those every other day, they'll be in a full day versus a 3/4 day. The other difference with the hybrid is that we will have to rotate our specials on a 6-day schedule. So students will get music once every 6 days and PE once every 6 days, because they the teachers have to provide that for the the blue day and the gold day, day 1, day 2. So that will be a decrease in the special time for our students. We'll obviously they'll have a little bit more room within a classroom. We can bring back some other furniture, and we can be a little more space and a little more creative when we have 10 or 11 in a classroom. Laura, am I missing anything on hybrid?
Patty and Laura,
the other advantage to hybrid is that moving the students in and out of the building, arrival and dismissal, will be much easier with, with a smaller student body. Patty and I have talked a lot about what arrival and dismissal might look like with a full, with a full opening, and the amount of cars that we anticipate, coming to campus every day could be staggering. Anyone who's done a drop off or pickup, either one of the buildings, it's
the logistical challenges, obviously, in the hybrid model are less and more manageable, but it shifts the focus. The challenge is more on learning when the students are not there, right? In those days where there's that, that's where it shifts the challenges to the distance learning piece, right?
The real advantage to having them in every other day over the distance learning is we can provide materials. We can send them home with updated books every other day. We can send them home with updated assignments rather than everything being online. That's a big advantage for us.
Quick, I have a question, which will be to all of the principals, but since you two are first, maybe you could help Miss. The voluntary distance learning, how are you feeling about the possibility if it was a full return to school in person, and you had 100 families, for example, who opted out? Have you thought about the live streaming that's being discussed and how that impacts you? Or how we, let's put it in the spin it in the positive, DBT, how we can make it possible.
And right. So I think that's a lot of our work is going to will be taking place this week. We really need to have some time with Dan DeVito to really talk about what that technology looks like, and the hardware and the software to how to make that happen. So I know we've talked about the streaming. We've talked about it's going to be a mix between synchronous and asynchronous and live, but I think the devil is in the details, and those still need to be flushed out at this point. So,
Taffy, if I may, it's a great.
I just want to ask a clarifying question. Sorry, Bill. One of the things that I'm thinking about, and maybe this applies more to the middle school and the high school. So if it does, just defer this question to later when the other principals speak. But when we talk about, having live streaming, my instinct is that you are teaching to the children who are in the classroom and you are teaching to the children who are at home at the same time. And if it requires some supplementary support to the kids at home later, so be it. We have to figure that out. But what it does save is you having to teach the kids who are in front of you and then rush home, teachers rushing home or rushing to a quiet space to create videos that are asynchronous learning for the kids who are at home, because that seems like double the work for me. Am I right there in that assumption, or am I missing something?
Good, Laura, I know you want to speak.
Yeah, I think your understanding of it is correct. The challenge with, especially for elementary students, is our students don't learn just by watching the teacher. There's interactions, there's follow-up, there's, at the beginning of the year, many of our kindergartners are 4 years old. And for them to follow along with the lesson that's happening in a classroom on a computer screen is very challenging. Which is why we're trying so hard to get students into the building in some capacity, because that magic that happens in the classroom is in those interactions, those in-person interactions.
But for those children who opt out, who are at home, asynchronous would not help them either, because that's also just watching a screen. You would have to be live for those children, correct?
Not necessarily. I mean, some of the districts around us, this is one of the biggest issues, and the governor today acknowledged this is very, very difficult, and the commissioner did. This may be actually the most difficult piece, is it may be more blended learning, which many of you know what that is. Some would be real time, some may not, for these same reasons. The team's working this week on this very issue, as Patty and Laura said, working with Dan DeVito and Ken. And they want to have at least a rough outline by this Friday, so that sort of midweek next week, we can have something out, still preliminary. But when this comes back to the board, this is something, and I think I sent to the board, it's public record, the commissioner's guidelines on these that we got late, I think on Thursday, July 22nd, because this is so difficult. They are giving the districts flexibility. Weston may not want to do this, but flexibility to say, voluntary distance learning is not synonymous with full-on distance learning. Voluntary distance learning is not synonymous with being in the classroom. And I think it'll be important is the team comes forward with, here's what Weston's recommending for you as a board to line that up against with what the state said is necessary, because the state has left. I think it's a lower standard than Weston will want. But that's where they've said it. So I just want to kind of put that in context. But
yeah,
and they'll bring it forward to you.
Yep. No, I appreciate that there's still work to do. I'm just interested in this opportunity while speaking with the principals face to face here to get their sense of whether or not it could work, and just to hear. And but I understand that in the elementary years, in fact, I'm a huge advocate that the children not rely on a screen to learn. So I'm with you on that. Okay, thank you. And I'll wait to hear what the other principals when they speak later. Thank you.
Laura, Patty, I have a quick question. Based on the recent survey that was submitted out and the results, it yielded that right now 76% of our families in Weston are willing to send their child back into the fall in some capacity. I think based on just what's going on nationally and the day-to-day where this pandemic stands, I think that probably parents will pivot come time that the school reopens. My question is, hypothetically, let's just say within a cohort, you have X% of students that wish to stay at home and have distance learning. Is there any thought to then maximize students with teachers that want to go to school, maximize the kind of the daily attendance of the 10-to-1 ratio, and then have that one teacher just kind of support the at-home distance learners? Because my hunch is that you're not going to get 10 students per day per teacher, right? You're going to have X% of distance learners in that particular classroom. So has there been any thought to structure the students with the teachers based on if they are actually going to be in school or not? Probably not, because we actually don't even know who is willing to send their child, right? Which is the subsequent surveys that are going to be coming down the pipeline. But I guess it was just a hypothetical question of should we think about that scenario?
So I think right now we need to put every child that's registered in a classroom. And then I guess once we see who's not going to, or who's opting into the distance learning, the full distance learning option, maybe to look at if we can utilize a staff member that's not able to come into the building, to whether that be like a grade level, and then they take those different students from within the various classrooms, but not taking them out of a classroom, but supporting them in that distance learning time would be, I think, an optimal scenario.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And I'll just
All I
add,
wanted to do is just get that you're thinking that way. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. And just to add to what Patty said, we also have to be prepared at any time for those students to come back. With probably a week's notice or maybe two, but we need to be prepared that at any time those classes could have all of the students wanting to return.
Yeah. Hi, this is Victor. I had a question. I'm struggling a little bit because from what I heard early on, I got the sense that the voluntary distance learning was something that was going to have to be provided no matter what. From the early,
Yes,
from the governor, from Cardona. So that if something we've known in this whole uncertainty is that needed to be done, and I think even the state was providing some tools statewide that could be leveraged for that. Is there any and that voluntary distance learning, I think, should be separate and mutually exclusive and distinct from the distance learning that's dictated, right? Why is that plan? Why can't we solidify that plan and move on and have that in place? Because we know that's not going to change, right? It just feels like there's still a lot of questions on a known.
Well, I think that's our work this week to solidify that a little bit more. I think some of that is waiting to see what that technology, both the hardware and the software that we're getting, how that works and what will be best for students at the different grade levels. So that's our work this week.
Yeah, I think
and that will be separately and distinct from a scenario where we have to go to all hands down, all district remote learning, correct?
I mean, at that point, they would have to get folded into the distance learning. I appreciate your concern there, Victor. It's an incredibly difficult issue from staffing, though, because if families are expecting teacher support and attention during this, and this is why the commissioner said this is the most difficult thing for us to figure out, is at the same time we're providing full in or hybrid with our teachers, they have to simultaneously staff, support, and teach a set of students who are remote. And that's where, and I will send later to the whole board the commissioner's statement on this, because they began to dramatically lower the bar because it is so difficult to figure out. And there could be some real issues with teachers saying, as I think actually Taffy referred to earlier, I'm full on with you in the classroom and I have the set of students elsewhere I'm also responsible for. How do I fit that into my given workday? And given the age differences. So I appreciate what you're saying. This week we'll start to figure it out some, but there's going to be some very serious staffing issues we're going to have to resolve for it to work well. And it may be a moment where the board agrees that the level of this educational delivery will be below what's provided for those students in district, in hybrid. And that's why if we're in full distance learning, everyone would get folded into that full distance learning.
Yeah, okay. So good. Look forward to having that discussion sooner than later. And then my other, and it's just a very broad point, and it's not that I feel strongly about this, it's just from following the discussion that's been happening in all of the governor's briefings. He's been advised by, I think, a board member from Pfizer, and if you take he takes the prism of follow the science, right? So if I understood his position correctly, coming from the science point of view, is that we live in a state where we're surrounded by states that are being flared up. But if you look at our KPIs, the positivity, the transmission, everything else looks relatively good, right? So, And the part, and I think I've heard the principal saying, the part about full return is having the kids just physically with their colleagues, with their classmates, with the teachers, right? That's the value. So what Dr. Gali was saying, that almost Connecticut has bought, you know, a 2-month window. And what he said, could it be that we take advantage of this two-day window to get full on, knowing fully that we're probably going to have to go to hybrid afterwards or a different model. But he was just exemplifying the value of being in the classroom, right? So I guess I just bring that up because, you know, I think we're talking a lot about the logistical challenges as well. I just don't want to overlook some of the other aspects that are really hard to measure, but it's being full on brings on all those benefits as well. So more a comment than a question, I guess. But yeah. I think just because I almost hear everybody say, and I want to, or maybe a question for all of you, you know, absent, like Melissa said, we're going to be told by health guidelines or the governors what we're going to do, right? But if left to our domain, and everybody's advocating the hybrid, what would be the tipping point to go back from a hybrid to a full schedule if left to our own devices, if we're not told what to do?
Yeah, I think it's going to have to be the public health and medical guidance on establishment of appropriate triggers for that. I think that that's, you know, absent being public health experts, that's the only thing that we really have to rely on. Either we're mandated or we're going to have to establish, with the guidance of our public health experts and our medical advisor, triggers that we need to adhere to in order to move from one mode of reopening to others. I don't have, you know, I don't have another answer besides that. I think that unless we're willing as a board to make the public health call without the advice of medical experts, I think that's what we're going to need to do, because I personally don't feel comfortable making the public health call. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other element of this, which is for the board to grapple with, and talking as much with Laura and Patty, and then later maybe some, you know, they're working closely with teachers in their building, at least at the elementary level, is full on. This will not be a classroom that Weston children are used to. It'll be a stripped down rows, 6 feet apart classroom. Hybrid, you can get a little more flexibility. So that's where, as the teams talked, and that's where you really need to listen to the team and have that opportunity to talk to them. Hybrid, you know, maybe that's where you optimize the academics, the social emotional, and the health. Because the team's saying that the academic and social emotional, with everybody in the stripped down classroom in rows, the highly limited interactions, that's far less the experience that Weston is used to and appreciates. And some of that's come through in the task force discussions. Michelle Albright and others have started to raise some questions about the race to full in on social emotional. We're saying we maybe actually do better on social emotional, do better on the academic, but it's a may on the hybrid. So these are good questions we have to have fast, but then you got to weave in up school road and weave in the concerns the governor raised today about literally, quote unquote, adolescents having parties and infection rates starting to move up in towns not too far from us. And that's that age group, middle school, high school, that we have to be thinking about. And I think if, you know, as you move up school road and talk about the differences, full and hybrid, even at WIS, you're down to a couple foot separation. You know, move up school road, you're at a couple foot separation. And at least Dr. Laura Marks says that's deeply troubling to her. You know, so it's balancing these kind of three pieces: the academic, the social emotional, and the health.
Bill,
Okay.
Are you finished, Victor? I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
No, I was just thanking Bill for his answer.
Oh, okay. No, I think you're touching on an important part with the social emotional. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about it, but you know, Laura and Patty, when I hear your reports, you know, thank you for the hard work, and I think you know they're in compliance and they're great programs for what our limitations are. But I can't help but feel sad for our K-5 learners, and I know that when I think about the full reopening and all the opportunities and things that they're missing and how their day is going to be different, I feel sad for them. And when I think about the hybrid and missing, you know, half of the population, my daughter's looking into changing her last name because she's mad that we're in the second half of the alphabet. And, you know, it's that, you know, they'll be missing seeing some of their closest friends just, you know, at recess or lunch or wherever. I'm just wondering, you know, what we can do in August before they're back to help them adjust to, under either model, what will be a very different day for them. And I'm not even sure the parents, I see there's 40 people on this call, maybe some of them are listening, but I don't know that everybody appreciates how different this will be for these, especially these young kids, and what we can do to acclimate them a little bit so that it's not a huge shock on day one.
You know, I've thought about doing something, sending out ahead of time, sort of to get used to some of the protocols or some of the safety guidelines that we're going to do. And we even talked about maybe using our mascot to do some of that, you know, make it sort of friendly. So we're working on it. I mean, I want to make it a fun environment. We want, you know, even if we do pause down the hallway to do the social distancing. So it's, you know, continue with our morning announcements, and, you know, so that, and get the kids involved in green screens. And so, yeah, we're not going to forget about the fun things at school. We'll just do the best we can from far away.
And I know our teachers will, we have very creative teachers, so dedicated, and really focused on the needs of the youngest learners. And I'm sure they will, you know, we've already talked about some ways, as Patty mentioned, but I know our teachers are going to rise to the occasion. We just have to keep our staff safe, and you know, Patty and I are, you know, one of the considerations is, will we have enough staff? A lot of the staff is concerned about coming back, and staff, and I think Ruby hit the nail on the head with, there are some changing views in the parent community. I've heard from a lot of parents who, back in the spring, it was everybody back, let's go. And, you know, based on what's happening around the country, there's a lot of concern in the community that I'm hearing. And, you know, is Connecticut doing so well? Because we have been so careful, and we haven't fully reopened like the other states have. And, you know, most of the organizations, I can't think of a sector that has completely fully reopened. You know, they limit capacity, they limit, you know, people in the stores or the restaurants. There's a lot of accommodations that have happened, which kind of brought us to the hybrid, because nobody's really reopened, which is why probably Connecticut is doing so well. But the parents, there is some growing concern. I agree with Ruby and the staff of what will happen if we try to put 500, 600 people back in a building.
Yeah, I think there's also, I mean, I've heard on social media that there are more than 100 families that are trying to organize their own sort of social, emotional support for children, to bring them together in safe distance outside of school hours, and to think about, and not just the social piece, but also the academic piece, and how they can engage educators to be with them, et cetera. They are brainstorming, and as they should, they're organizing to supplement and complement. So that's good stuff. But and I hope you all know about it, and that they're reaching out to you.
Maybe we can move to the upper schools. We're at 8:15 now.
Okay. All right. I can start with the middle school. A lot of what
Patty and Laura said actually echoes. I don't think I need to repeat some of the concerns about a full reopening in terms of drop-off dismissal. At the middle school, we simply can't meet the CDC guidelines of social distancing if we have a full-on reopening. We are, as I said earlier, hand scheduling our students. We are trying to keep cohorts together as much as possible. And our cohorts, we're trying for the homeroom cohort for the academics, but at least our team level cohorts, as we consider our specials in our PF phase to the greatest possible. One of the things I think that stood out to me was,
is it just me, Dan? You're breaking up a little
Kathy
bit.
both talked earlier about the staff needing
Dan?
time to digest this
Dan, I think we're only getting.
information. When I sent them out, like I first sent out the plans and discussed it with.
Hey, Dan, can you hear us?
I think, Dan, we're getting every, you're cutting out on
I'm
some parts of your
sorry, I'll try
sentences.
again. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try my phone instead.
Okay.
My microphone's working today. All right. Let's wait. I'm joining you by phone. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you have to mute the other. Whoops. Okay, great. Whoops. Lisa, you're on mute.
No, I was texting
Okay,
Dan
go
that we
ahead.
couldn't hear him,
Go ahead.
and that he had
Okay.
to mute himself. Dan, are you there? Okay.
I'm going to try now. Sorry, I'm on my phone. So one of the things that Taffy and Ruby said earlier really resonated with me because, our plan was developed and then we got input from the CILs and from the team leaders. And then it was sent out to the staff, and then I met with them last Thursday. And they're very concerned. There's a high number of staff members, as I think it was Taffy said, everybody's concerned about a full reopening or coming back to school. The safety and the health concerns are foremost in their minds. And there's a mountain of details. Now that we have the scenarios and the plans out there, it's putting the details to the plan that is where the work is right now. So we talked about cohorting. I don't know how much of that you heard, but we are hand scheduling our classes so that we have homerooms be the academic cohort to the greatest extent possible, and then using our broader team level cohorts to maintain that wider cohort. But I'm still concerned, as as was said earlier when Tracy was talking about, we still have to break cohorts at times, and we have to have those protocols in place to make sure that we're meeting the health and safety needs, the hand sanitizing, the social distancing. I think with a full reopening, or even just an all-day hybrid, having students wear masks and teachers wear masks for that length of time, as we look for mask breaks, is still going to be difficult. It is not school as we knew it. Under any of these scenarios, we are not planning to assign lockers at the middle school, and we are not having passing time. We're having the teachers move and students take breaks as they need to go to the bathroom throughout the day. Lunch will have to be in 2 locations, as it will be at the high school. So there are just a lot of concerns, and the in-class experience will not be the same with a full-on reopening because it's just not the flexibility for movement. The hybrid, bringing in the blue cohort and the gold cohort, does allow us more flexibility in terms of increasing the social distancing and the safety. We really do think that the cohort with every other day live interactions and full-on distance learning for everybody in the afternoon allows us to maintain more of our academic rigor in the instructional time. I'm not sure if it was clear that the model for the middle school and the high school
was that those are synchronous instructions in the afternoon. So I wanted to clarify that. You know, the staff is concerned about, you know, just the cleaning protocols, the ventilation, the lack of air conditioning in the building in all areas. We're hearing those, and we're working on that. We are working, as was mentioned this week, on the distance learning for those families that choose. Our social emotional, we are really looking at our Wingman program. I've been in contact with our co-advisors for the Wingman program who are reaching out to Ian Hockley, the founder, and his online resources that he's put in place that we could use no matter what model we are in. But clearly more needs to be done in terms of helping to prepare families and students for the return to school. We do think that you know, that our hybrid model allows us some extra time in the morning for that first period class. Some of it may be eaten up, though, as was mentioned earlier, with just the longer drop-off time, especially if it's a full reopening, less so if it's 50%. Rather than belabor anything else, I think I would prefer to just answer questions or give Lisa a chance to talk.
Maybe we go to Lisa first and then open up the questions. Yeah.
Sure. I just want to reiterate that for us, for full-blown, everybody in, it doesn't work because of it just doesn't work because of the square footage. We can't make the 6 feet. Some rooms it would be between 3 to 5. You know, that we have classrooms of different sizes, space that had been renovated at the high school turned into classrooms that are smaller rooms than usual. So it just will not physically work. We cannot cohort. We offer over close to 150 classes. We have over 300 sections. So for example, English 9 has 10 different sections. A freshman could be in 6 different math classes. So cohorts, for those that are listening, that might be elementary parents and don't know the intricacies of the high school schedule, it won't work. Everybody back and then being able to follow. We are concerned, you know, at the beginning, there was a comment made that more teens are socializing. I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's a reality and every family has to take responsibility for that. As far as sports, I know that's another big thing, but you know, it's 40% in the fall are athletes, not 70%, 40%. So I just wanted to clarify that while between 60 and 70% overall participate in sports, in the fall it's 40%. When you look at the hybrid models, and we designed them similarly to the middle school, we do like the one where it's the in-person half in the morning and then distance in the afternoon, for a lot of the reasons that Dan said, but there are a couple of other reasons. One of them is that in the afternoons, then you really can clean the buildings well because the students are leaving at 11. Yeah, there's no lunch. I mean, I have to say lunch wasn't a big factor in determining between hybrid 1 and hybrid 2. I know from experience with high schoolers that sitting in an unair-conditioned gym for half an hour facing one person in rows sitting at a desk is not going to be pleasant for them. 26 of our classrooms do not have air conditioning. That's 40%. And out of that, 43%. Out of those 26, 5 of them do not have windows. So we cannot put students even in those rooms. Again, the reason we can't go full blown. If you look at the hybrid, there's something that I did want to point out, and I think Victor was getting at it a little bit. When you look at the hybrid, one of the questions that was raised that Ms. Herman shared with me is, you know, if you bring in half of the students, whether it be full or all, full day or half day, you know, there's a concern about getting through the content, giving the students enough time to demonstrate their learning. And we really need to think about the learning here and not how we can juggle all of the operations. And by that I mean is you know, Victor, you brought up the idea of the voluntary distance learning. We're not going to come in and we want access to that, which is something that we are working on. However, there was an idea that, well, when you do the blue and gold days, why can't on the blue day, the gold kids just watch in the classroom via distance learning, and then it would just keep going. I think it's important to note that whether we do a full day or a half day hybrid, you really have to think about the type of instruction and the connection you want for the students. Weston prides itself on personalization of instruction. If we have half of the students in, then we can tailor that specific instruction that day to being in person. And the plan was that the students that were not involved would have an asynchronized task. When you have half of the group, for example, you could do a science lab, being careful about the materials. You can access some of our very sophisticated programs and software, for example, Project Lead the Way, which you cannot, in talking to Mr. DeVito, we can't get access on at long distance. That's very challenging. We learned that in the spring. We have videography software. Yes, there are workarounds. They could do other assignments, but to be able to come in and actually work on the equipment, obviously cleaning it appropriately, that's what we would want to do. We would want to be able to conference while students are working on small groups. So if you do the hybrid and then let the others just kind of watch along, a large number of them, then that really then becomes more about logistically managing a huge cohort of kids on top of the voluntary, and it would take away of the whole purpose of the adult to student connection that we would have in the in-person that we think is very, very important. I also do worry about, in looking at the two different hybrids, the stress of going through a day, all day, half the kids in the building, having lunch in one air-conditioned space, one unair-conditioned, and wearing the masks the entire time. I can see it could be stressful. It's not easy. These are really challenging courses also. And I know that the staff is concerned about their questions. We had 3 different admingles where they could voice concerns. And the biggest concern was, how are you going to clean the rooms? How are we going to meet the social distancing? And, when you look at our staff, every staff has a different skill set. But for example, you might say, okay, kind of like what they were talking about at the elementary school, if there was a math teacher that, for example, was going to handle all of the voluntary distance learning. Well, that math teacher has to be able to be certified to teach the AB and the BC calculus. They have to know the Project Lead the Way, the certifications of those courses. When you're talking about some of those high-level courses or the languages, we only have one person that can teach Chinese. So that's it. Same thing with French. There are a lot of other constrictions, I guess I would say, with regards to the particular courses, the teachers that are certified to teach, our 20+ AP courses, that they have to be the ones to do it because they were specifically trained for that. So we don't have as much wiggle room around that. And finally, another question, I want to get to some of the questions that Meredith asked. There was a question about if we were full distance learning, why don't we use the A through H day? We don't use the A through H day, the full rotation at the high school, quite frankly, because the drop 2, meet 6 with science labs, with PE, causes a lot of problems. And just transplanting that into a total distance learning, you're talking about kids being in front of a computer for 56 minutes per class. If you're in a science class, you're spending 2 hours straight in that science class. We look at the social emotional piece, and that's just not, I'm sorry, that would just be very, very difficult. I think I touched on everything. So I'm going to open it up for questions. Thank you.
Lisa and Dan, in terms of overall instructional time for the what you kind of both viewed as the preferred hybrid option, how can you comment on that?
Sure. I think that when you look at the time, you're looking at 40-minute blocks, and feel free to jump in, Dan. You're looking at 40-minute blocks, whether it be the hybrid or all day, I believe. Where the challenge comes in, Tony, is if you're doing, a blue gold all day, then when you have the distance learning component in the afternoon, the teachers like this because it would increase the amount of different time, if I'm explaining myself. When you're meeting the opposite classes in the afternoon for everyone, you can keep that moving at a different pace. And then when you have your in-class opportunity face-to-face in the building, that instruction, we would hope, would look very different within certain constraints. Grouping different, but again, all those other types of experiences and accessing some of the more sophisticated equipment that we have would be done better. Dan, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think we felt like that allowed students more instructional time, synchronous instructional time, whether it was via distance learning or in person, more so than the every other day. On the every other day one, it actually takes us 8 days to rotate our students in if we're doing the half day for the live instruction for our specials, but they get the synchronous instruction more frequently because we're doing that every day with half of the schedule. So it was overall the balance between instructional time we felt was greater with the hybrid.
I think also one of the things that's important here is it's kind of like all these different phases we've been going in. I would imagine that we would be kind of going through different phases over the course of the year, depending on how all of this plays out and with the health guidelines. And so to sort of look at it also as how can we make it a continuum and have students feel comfortable with a continuum and then switching to another type of model, if you will. If we go to full distance, that's why we thought the hybrid one was more appropriate.
The hybrid number 2, right?
Or the one that's half, I think I might have the numbers wrong, half morning, afternoon distance.
Yeah, whatever, yeah.
One,
hybrid 1, sorry.
Could we do either though? Yes, it's just, you've got to look at the pros and cons of both.
Lisa, I had a question about content. Have you looked at, through these models, how much content you can get in each model? And I guess that, for you specifically, with regard to the AP classes, I guess is where there's legitimate pressure to get in that content. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. We feel that we can get in more content with the half day and the distance learning.
Okay. My concern with that one is just the kids are going to come home and check out. So can you talk a little bit about how you got to that? And are you getting in full content under that model?
I don't think that in these models, Hillary, will ever get into full content. What we have to do is look at, and the SILs are very aware of this, the teachers are very aware of this. We have to look at how we can compact certain units and what are the most important things that we need to cover. And also, what are the key skills that we need to provide the students? It's really all about the development of skills. Now with AP courses, yeah, it's also a lot of content. We know that in all the different courses. I don't think they'll check out because it's synchronized. They got to sign in. They got to log on. They have to be there. So, and our counselors are really adept at, they had lists in the spring where they made phone calls. They'd have their daily call-ins. So that's how we would have to approach it, that the afternoon isn't optional.
And just to chime in a little bit on that, Lisa, one of the things that you and I have discussed is the possibility of, if certain students need to be in the building to participate in distance learning in a super manner, that model allows us to do that, to keep some students afternoon for the distance learning so they don't check out.
Yeah, exactly. We already have a list, if you will, of students about whom we're concerned. And we're not talking just about necessarily students that have been identified through special ed, but other students that, for a variety of reasons, they need to be closely monitored. And with that model, then the expectation would be that they would stay.
Any other questions for Lisa and Dan?
I just have one question, and it's really for all four, maybe for Bill. Am I correct in understanding that in order to get a more complete picture of what the voluntary distance learning component will look like, we're about a week or two away from understanding, what those parents can expect?
I'll take a start at that. As of this Friday internally, we want to have a preliminary outline ready and then have something actually, as I mentioned to Ken and Dan DeVito today, to send to the families next Wednesday, because it is a very complicated process. I thought I'd sent to the board on the July 22nd memo from the commissioner. I may not have. I'll re-forward it after this meeting. We can actually ask Meredith to post it next to this agenda item. It's a public record document, but I think reading that ahead of what you see will be helpful, because we always strive to be way above the standard in Weston. You can see that they've brought this standard down in ways you as a board may not be comfortable. So, for example, saying to families, if you're on voluntary distance learning, there may be some programming you're not eligible for. Saying to families on voluntary distance learning, if your son or daughter is an athlete, you may not be eligible to participate. They give the district that right. Saying to a family that do not expect us to equate to what you have going on in the regular year. And this is a factor, relates maybe to Project Challenge. Let me take it out of this district. But in other districts with even more extensive gifted and talented programs, this is a real issue from another district. Could be saying to that family, we're not able to provide that gifted and talented opportunity through the voluntary distance learning program. I'm not saying that's where we're going to go at all, but because this is so complicated from a staffing standpoint, that's why the state has sort of laid that out. So while the team's working on this, and so early next week, we want to, share with the board before it goes out to the public, and staff are involved in a lot of these conversations verbally ahead of things going out. I hope you heard that today. Principals are meeting with the staff, talking with them well before anything is broadcast out, because there are multiple ways we communicate, obviously. But we can make sure you get that document. I mean, I'll kick it by an email to you tonight, and then we'll post it with us so the whole community can see it. I'm hoping we don't have to go to the state lower standard on this, but it is complicated.
One of the things that I think this was all extremely informative and a lot of questions were answered. I think what we need to do is to start moving the ball forward in terms of narrowing that funnel of options, right? Because and it's going to be hard for us as a board to do that without first getting that public health and medical guidance. So what I would actually suggest is the next special meeting we have sooner versus later is we try to get to the public health issue first, because then that will help us really then have a view on which option we can then hone our questions on. Because right now we're asking a lot of questions, but we're not necessarily moving that ball forward in terms of eliminating options, because we really haven't really made that decision on the public health aspect of this, which is the first decision that needs to be made. And so what I would what I would propose is to have probably have the next special meeting very soon and really focus it solely on the public health aspect, so that then we can kind of start moving that ball forward. I mean, at the end of the day, the state may mandate something, but in the absence of that, I think that that's probably more of the immediate next step, because I don't think we'll get to that final answer without going through that hoop first. Right.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, again, the team here has done a lot of work on this. We've had many, many conversations with Mark Cooper, now a lot with Dr. Marks. And that's, we're I think, even though some in the community would want us fully back in, our embracing of the students academically, SEL, and the public health is somewhere in that hybrid mix. I mean, we're in real time on this. So literally, as we've been here, getting more information on what the governor actually said today at 4 o'clock, and there's pretty wide confirmation that they're saying at least middle school and high school, they're giving local control, even though that wasn't as explicit as we want. I think there'll be an open question still at the early elementary level. But the other thing you're seeing across the region is at those older student levels wanting hybrid for that same mix of reasons. So I think then we figure out how we allow, or not allow, kind of provide you that opportunity to be engaging with Mark Cooper, engaging with Dr. Laura Marks, to kind of get a sense of that from that public health standpoint.
Yeah, I'm just, and please, other board members chime in. I'm just trying to work back from, a decision point that gives everyone an opportunity to be ready, staff, students, families. And I, and from my perspective, I think there's, the public health issues are first. And so if we can kind of get through that, we may be able to then, like I said, just narrow that funnel and hone in on what we think is the most, the expected path to the fall. Unless others have.
I just, a task force question. Are you doing another parent survey? Because sort of like as we're going through this, I'm thinking, I don't remember if you asked, if we go back full time, what will you, will you then do voluntary distance learning? Like, we didn't get into that in the last parent survey. So where are you with all of that? Because I mean, it's a big component since we have such a big group of unknown.
Right. I mean, I can speak to that. They're task force members here. I don't know if they want to speak to that. We did resolve that today in the task force, and now we're having to administration operationalize it. So I'll just answer. Melissa and Ruby took the lead on drafting what we're going to call, at least working title, rapid response survey to be sending out actually every week. It's 3 questions. It's very tight. One is related to this exact question of will you be back in or not. The other is transportation. That's not to sort of reduce our bus runs, but simply just to try and manage kind of the numbers on buses, because families may have great concern about, am I putting my child onto a bus where some of these health risks will not be managed as well as they might be in the school. So asking that, we can't plan specifically on a survey. So actually next week, after we have more clarity out on voluntary distance learning. So the first one's due to go out, if not tomorrow, Wednesday at the latest, very quick. What'll slow, we have it drafted. It's all ready. It's in SurveyMonkey. It's all set. What's waiting is a little cover note to put a little better context for families on some of the other deadlines, one of which will be next week. We'll send you a more focused one, which will include at least an outline on what voluntary distance learning will entail, because in that, and this will now track neatly with other districts in the region. Next week, a bunch of districts are going to start asking families, are you committing to voluntary distance learning or not? A couple of districts already have done that. I can tell you that those families are saying, well, I don't know what I'm committing to. What am I buying? right? So at least next week we might be able to outline it. It won't be final yet, but at least outline what it entails with more to follow. So long words, I'm sorry. Lots of words, I'm sorry, but I just want to give you the picture. So no later than Wednesday, a quick, short-hitting survey, preliminary. Will you be back in district or not? Will you ride the bus or not? And stay tuned, because next week another survey will follow, same questions, but with information on voluntary distance learning. We thought this week still give us the preliminary sense, and it's a tight turnaround. You know, it goes out Wednesday. We want it back by Friday. It's Survey Monkey. So is that pretty much, and task force members who heard this discussed, we went back and did some work on this, and that's where we are right now. Is that helpful, Hillary? Is that?
Yep. Thank you.
And again, thank you to Ruby and Melissa for moving that along. The other parent, they're the board members on the task force. Parent members have looked at it as well. I mean, a general issue that we have talked about a lot, this may come back up as you look at things, is are we using external space, outside tents and all the rest? Your team here's thought a lot about that. And I keep going back and ask, because some of the area districts are obtaining tents, small sort of wedding size tents, not as big as we had used in the past for graduation. The team here very thoughtfully keeps saying we'd rather try and work this within our existing internal space, because the logistics, the management of tent spaces is very, very difficult. And so we're not there at this point. Again, you've got a very experienced group in Weston when it comes to operating with tents. We are potentially open to going outdoors with students, but we have to manage that. And so we're open to that. I just want you as a board to know about that. And we've been thinking about that, and that may be a follow-on question later as we get into things. But we are thinking about all our opportunities and looking at what other districts are doing. But that would be a case where we would tack differently than Wilton, New Canaan, and else. They are obtaining tents, as Lisa knows, because she's talking a lot with area principals to get a sense of things. But we just feel that it opens up a set of issues that aren't going to be a solution. Lisa, go ahead, please.
Yeah, if I can add, when I heard about the tents in New Canaan, I said, oh my goodness, we better get tents. And so I got the dimensions that the guy said he was getting, where he got them. We went outside, and, it sounds great. But like Patty said earlier this evening, the devil is in the details. When we marked it out in the courtyard, I was like, this isn't worth it. Like the amount of kids that underneath the tent then still have to be socially distanced, it doesn't make sense. I mean, we've looked at with the hybrid with half the kids in. For example, there are some areas in our courtyard that have an overhang where you could fit a small group of students in desks out there and obey the social distancing rules. There are ways when the weather is good that, yes, you could go out, and we have 2 courtyards and figure some space out. But one of our districts was talking about, I think it was Jerry and principal, we could bring them out into the football field on the bleachers. That sounds great, but how do you project anything? There's no technology out there. There's just, when you really start looking at some of the details, I highly, I'm just not convinced that it's a way to go to run out and buy $3,000 worth of tents to put them up in our 2 courtyards.
Other questions on this?
I could just add to that at the elementary level.
You want to try again, Laura? That broke up.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Lisa said. We thought about the tents at the elementary level too, and using outdoor space. I think there's, what some of the questions we've gotten from the community are, if you use the outdoor space, can't you bring everybody back and spread them out more? On any given moment, we have to make sure that we can provide the social distancing and the space within the building. Obviously, because weather is a factor. We can't rely on our outdoor space. and when we looked at possibly using some of the outdoor space for instruction, now we've cut into our recess areas and our break areas, which we really want to try to maintain. We feel those areas are very important to be able to have enough space for our students to get outside and hopefully have some mask breaks, move around a little bit. They're not going to be moving as much during the school days, during the instructional times within the classroom. So those outdoor areas become even more important for movement breaks.
I have a facilities question with regards to all 4 schools. With COVID, have you heard of any regulations or codes changing? And if so, are all 4 schools going to be reevaluated to ensure that every single room and area of the school is up to code?
Phil, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Not at this time, but we haven't heard any change in any kind of regulation or guidelines right now.
Okay. Do you want to?
What, if I may follow up, Ruby, one thing that's come up is with ventilation systems and using different types of filters. Mike DeMastro and Phil have looked at that in terms of the system. Dr. Marks has urged us to look at some HEPA filters, portable, which we've been doing, especially for the isolation rooms and the nurses' offices. So that's not quote unquote new regulation from the state, but that's again working very closely with our medical advisor on some ways. And Phil can speak a little bit to the filter issue. We are looking at ventilation issues. We're looking at rooms that may be a problem. The state is providing resources of people to talk to on this, but the standards and guidelines at this point have not changed. However, though, would be as you work, as we're doing with Dr. Marks or Mark Cooper, they may be suggesting some things.
Okay. Yep. I think that that's an important detail. If we can just regularly update the public in terms of what we're doing with the air purification or filters or et cetera, because it's definitely a hot topic on social media. So let's just keep communicating about that as new information comes.
Yeah, we're having a facilities committee meeting just on reopening. And I think those are the types of things that we actually should be covering and make sure that we update the full board at the next meeting as well. If there's no more on this topic, we have a few more to do before we call it an evening. But thank you everyone for the update. A tremendous amount of work has been done already. There's still a lot to do. This is unprecedented. None of us have ever been through this before. And so we're just, I appreciate everyone's learning as they go. It's just going to be an accelerated time frame to get to the answer. And it's going to require some pretty heavy lifting over the next couple of weeks. But thank you everyone for continuing to dig in with passion. Maybe we can go to the next topic, calendar.
And I think after this topic, principals, please, if Tony agrees, excuse yourself from the meeting. But at least for this topic, we may need you. So I don't know, Ken, are you going to lead us through the calendar adjustment?
Yes, I did a little bit of a preface earlier in my update. So essentially, for discussion, presenting before the board 2 choices. One in which we extend for 5 days in a row the teacher start with students coming in on Monday the 31st and adding a 6th day on the Friday the 4th versus having all 6 days up front the full week, and then the 31st would be the 6th day, and then students start on September 1st. So those were the, after hearing the board at the last meeting, in support of having additional time for teachers for that first week. We then decided we just hold off until this meeting to allow time for more questions and thinking on this, on how we might use that 6th day, that additional day for supporting teachers. And so I figured I'd just reopen for discussion at this point.
I was thinking about it this week and thinking about how critical, and I think you'd made this suggestion, but how critical it will be to have a day for you all to come back together after having tried out 4 days of school. So that 6th day then being on the Friday, so that you can everyone come back together on the Friday after having tried out 4 days. Are you still thinking about that? Because I'm in full support of that. So that you have
that is the recommendation that we have in support with support from the SILs, as well as I think that's wise. I think with the extra couple of days that first week, 5 days for teachers, that gets us a firm foundation. We get students in for 4, and then that Friday, by reallocating one of our original PD days to that Friday, I think that makes sense. Yeah. Does not affect the end for students at the end of the year. Does not affect the end date for any other portion of the calendar, because the state's giving us that flexibility of 177 days.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that.
I think it sounds like there's agreement here. Okay, let's have a motion.
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the recommended changes to the WPS 2020-2021 school calendar. And for details, that means that the start of school would be shifted to August 31st, with September 4th added as an additional student day off.
Second?
Second, Ruby.
All in favor?
Aye, Melissa.
Aye, Taffy.
Aye, Ruby.
Aye, Hillary.
Aye, Victor.
Aye, Tony. All opposed?
Tony, did you just, are you wrapping that up or did you disappear? And Tony disappeared.
He's frozen.
Okay. I think we heard, where's our vice chair? Melissa, should you jump in a moment like this?
Yeah, I mean, everyone said aye and there was no discuss, so motion passes.
Great.
Tony's dialing back in. But Bill, in the meantime, I think let's just move on to the next agenda item.
Sure. And principals, thank you very much. I think you all can go forth and work that much harder. So, but thank you very, very much. Great contributions. You have before you 3-second reads on, I think, very straightforward policy. And if you refresh, if you're that bold, you'll get you should have the motions for the policies. They may not show back up, but you've got 3-second reads here on policies.
Sorry, again, I'm back now.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
There's and as it's a second read, if you don't have questions with each of those, there'd be a motion for you to adopt that policy. Since the first one is a modification on the public complaint policy, it may seem like years ago that you looked at this. This change is, I think, very important and also straightforward. But in the most simple terms, it's to make sure that there is a level above where the complaint is heard for an appeal. So it moves the superintendent up to the appeal level. Otherwise, families have no place to appeal a complaint, because in the current policy, the superintendent is immediately active and involved in the complaint. And there are a set of complaints that by nature would not go to the board level. So then if a family did not feel that the decision was correct, they would not have an appeal level. So that's in the simplest language what this adjustment to the complaint policy is. And again, it's driven by trying to be more responsive to families who may raise complaints. So that's the first one, and given you need to vote on each of these individually, I would see if there are questions about this one. Otherwise, we'll need someone to create the motion language. It can be very simple. I apologize that the motion language didn't make it into this document. Any questions about this one? And if you refresh better than I did, maybe the motion language showed.
Yeah, the motions are here.
Okay, thanks. Any questions on this?
No. Let's have a motion on this.
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the updates to policy and regulations 1312.
Second.
Second, Ruby.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye, Taffy.
Aye, Melissa.
Hi, Gina.
Aye, Ruby.
Aye, Hillary.
Hi, Victor.
Aye, Tony. All opposed? Okay. Motion passes. Let's go to the next one.
The next two are connected, but you'll need to vote individually. And to make it simple, both are related to allowing, by designation of the superintendent, an employee of, in this case, the bus company, to pull video and get that to the relevant building administrator. The policies as currently struck do not allow that to happen. Other districts have that flexibility given to, in this case, First Student or the other bus company, whoever it may be, that's contracted to pull video that can then be used for student disciplinary purposes. So while two separate policies, they both relate. And this, you looked at it last month, policy committees looked at it, and this does fit also with this one, as the others had a legal review, so it fits appropriately legally.
Can I have a motion?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the updates to policy and regulation 1331, the use of video monitoring devices and video recordings.
Second.
Second, Ruby.
Thanks, Ruby. All in favor?
Aye, Taffy.
Aye, Melissa.
Hi, Gina.
Aye, Ruby.
Aye, Hillary.
Hi, Victor.
Aye, Tony. All opposed? Okay, motion passes. The last one now.
It's the companion piece to the one you've just voted on. It's updating this policy for the same reason. And it did also update the notification of staff in a different way. We don't have personnel handbooks anymore. So it updates how we would notify staff that cameras exist on the buses.
We have a motion.
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the updates to policy and regulation 5131.2, video and audio recording on school buses.
Second.
Second, Ruby.
All in favor?
Aye, Ruby.
Hi, Gina.
Aye, Melissa.
Aye, Hillary.
Hi, Victor.
Aye, Tony. All opposed? Motion passes. Next item. Bill, anything on district update?
Yeah, I'll be quick. It's on a very big topic though, and it's one that the chair and I communicated on. It feels like 3 years ago, but it was probably just 3, 4 weeks ago. Typically August is the time, well, for the administration, it starts really much of the summer when we're looking at the existing goals and action plans. And then during August, we finalize those in our leadership team retreat. And then in late August, those are brought to the board for review and discussion. Tony agreed with my recommendation that all our energies are completely focused on reopening. And once we have clarity on that, more likely in September, October, we can come back, really just delay by a couple months our annual goal setting and action plan approach. Because to do that now, we would be setting the goal. The outcome doesn't change. It's global citizens. The 5 major goal areas don't change, but it's those action steps within each that we update every year. And we've been very good about having continuity year to year on those. But to set those now would not reflect the reality of how we may be operating. So we thought it was better to figure out how we're opening, then go through that exercise, which would probably push it into September, maybe have the board in October looking at what still the goals are for the year. So I think that's an important update for you to have at this point.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, I would like to do it. I think that there's a huge bandwidth issue now. I think tackling it now is really not practical. But as soon as we actually start executing on the reopening, we should sit down and really go through the district goals. And I would like to do it in, as early as we can, but probably in September will be the earliest we can probably get together.
Yeah, I mean, because just to name one big topic, depending on how we're operating, do we have the bandwidth to come back to school start end time? And that would obviously be quite a significant action area for us. So any of those, so I think once we know how we're operating or have a good sense of it, I would agree we should look at it. The other thing is, just so you know, we are working actively still. We have a good pool of people applying. We have openings, and we landed a wonderful first grade teacher today, moving up to this region from elsewhere. I want to be vague right now to protect that person's privacy, but it's a great new first grade addition for us. So we're excited. We've got some really, really good people applying. As I had mentioned earlier, we had landed 2 wonderful individuals, a math teacher and a physics teacher, who, due to the situation we're in, turned back in their job, but we're working on alternatives. So we're still very active in bringing good talent into the district, even in this situation. So that's my update for you. So thanks.
The one other thing I wanted to add to that is that we also need to do a board workshop on race equity and our social justice initiative. Again, let's get through the reopening plans, and then we need to commit to getting that done and figuring out as a board what that initiative is going to look like for the district. I'd like to do that before school starts, but let's get the reopening plans done as well. Committee chairs, anything to add? We also have to do a probably before the September, or maybe even in September, before the budget process starts again. We need to do a budget postmortem and discuss the budget process for the upcoming year. That's something that's still on our list of things that need to get done. In terms of future meetings, what we're going to do is add a few meetings, special meetings a week on our calendar between now and mid-August to deal with the reopening items as they come up. I'd like the next one to be planned in the next few days if we can. I'll confer with Bill just to try to tackle the public health issues first. We'll figure out how to get that done, but there will be, I think Meredith will start working on what the best days of the week and times of the day is practical for everyone to be able to convene quickly for special meetings if and when we need them. Anything else from any of the board members? Bill, anything else from you? No.
Not at this point. We do look forward to getting those special meetings set so we can plan for those.
Yep.
And be able to bring you the kind of information you need for your decision making. Related to that, Meredith and I in the next week will update the tool that's posted on CABE. We have that monthly meeting agenda list. We'll bring that forward for the new year, and just so we can still use that as a planning instrument. The one you currently have still 1920. We've not updated it for 20 to 21.
Okay.
Tony, can I ask a process question about these meetings? I did note that and I'm sure you saw that on the chat on the side of our screen here on Google Meet, there were a couple of questions from the public, actually 2 questions by the same person. And I just wondered how those, I know they're not addressed because there was a chance for public comment and they're not addressed during this meeting, but I just wanted to make sure that someone can follow up with the questions that were put there, as they are in writing to the board.
I think there's a series of questions. There was also a submission that was not read during the public comment. We need to figure out a way of making sure we read all of those, and in future meetings, just try to address those issues. All of them are that either were not read or were done through the chat, are topics that we absolutely will be addressing. So in one way or another, I think these questions from the public will be addressed.
Great. I wanted to recognize that. Thank you.
And Tony, and maybe Bill, along those lines, I thought we had talked about moving the platform of our meetings to Zoom, where we may be able to better manage this stuff.
So is Mr. DeVito still on the line? We anticipated this question. Dan, are you out there? Or I'll answer it. Well, so the answer is, I think if the board, depending on what you want to do in August, because an open question is depending on how the district's opening. If you have staff in district, you as a board may feel you need to move into appropriately socially distancing in-person meetings. So that's a question, not to get resolved tonight, but that's a question. If we stay in what I might call distance meeting mode, we would shift to Zoom, and Dan DeVito is working through the best way to have that happen so we have it happen smoothly and appropriately. Before Craig Tunks left, he had worked out an arrangement with the town where their Zoom contract would apply to us. Dan's gone back in to double check some things, because even last week in the region, Zoom bombing occurred in a board meeting. We thought we had eliminated that problem. So Dan is trying to make sure that doesn't happen. So the simple answer is yes, we can shift to Zoom. We just want to do a little final checking on that, if that's clear. But question one is, are you meeting digitally or not? But we'll keep working on the Zoom backup to be shift to Zoom.
You know, my feeling on that, and we can talk about it further in future meetings, but my feeling on that is we should be meeting consistent with what we're asking the students and staff to be doing. So, you know, and this is the longer topic, but, you know, if we're asking everyone to, you know, go into buildings and even in a hybrid mode, then we should be also, as a board, talking about being able to meet with the proper social distancing and giving accommodations for those who are not comfortable to join in the meeting digitally as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that in theory. My biggest concern would be, though, if you'd have to get the entire middle school library deep cleaned after we left at whatever time at night. That's a little bit of a switch on it. I mean,
and also what are the rules around the public actually, are we going to be limited in the amount of public participation that's allowed in the room? I mean, all of this needs to be, discussed. But I think we probably should call it a night for tonight. And we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Bill.
Bye.